to admit from the lobby. It looks like Julie's jumping on. Hello, Julie. And the first item is the review of the agenda. Does anyone have comments on the agenda? Seeing none, I'll hand it over to Heather if she can do the roll call. Oh, sorry. Oh, wait. Somebody else is letting them in. Amanda Sullivan Astor.
Just
Becca,
arriving, I think.
is that, oh, it is Amanda. Yep, she's walking in. Okay. Becca Shively. Present. David Bugney.
Here.
Gary Jensen.
Here.
Glenn Ahrens. Jake Ryan will be joining later in a meeting this morning. Julie Woodward.
Here online.
McMichael. Mauricio Valerio. Mike Cafferata.
Here for a short time.
Wendy Gerlach. Here. And Mauricio sends his regrets that he couldn't make this meeting. Thank you. Do we have any comments on the prior meeting summary? Seeing no comments, I suggest that be considered unofficially approved by us. The next item is public comment. Do we have any members of the public that would like to make comments? No members of the public today. Share updates. No particular update. Happy to see you all. This is my last chairing of this meeting. Dave is going to be stepping up and I'll be out of town in June. So you will be chairing then. So I just want to thank you all for all of the time you spent on this committee. Everyone all the members who are ex officio also have been so supportive of this committee over a long period of time, including way before I became part of the committee. So thank you to the department as well for always showing up and keeping us informed and collaborating with us. And special thanks to really appreciate it. I know that usually on our annual report, I say thank you, but that always feels kind of formal. So I just want to say personally how much I've enjoyed working with this group. It's one of the most collaborative and I don't know, just lots of fun ideas are sparked in this meeting. And I feel like they link to issues really important for this group. And so it's been a really nice forum to be a part of. Thank you all.
Well, and thank you, Wendy, for, shepherding us as head of the committee for so many years now, and for all the work you've done, helping craft really solid agendas. And that annual report has seemed like it has more and more, has had consistently more substance as time has gone on. And it's been kind of wonderful to you are a wonderful example of what it is to learn more and more about an area and other people's perspectives. And I think if we could clone you, Oregon would be a better place.
So that's really nice of you to say. I'm also looking forward to what happens next because it's always good having change in committees. This leads to other voices coming up and other ways of doing things. So yeah, so I think it was Evan Barnes who was chair before me, and then there were some changes when I started chairing, and I'm sure there'll be lots of great innovations coming on in the future as well. And we have good new memberships, so that's all positive too. So those are my comments on updates, and I guess we'll move over to Mike for the next point.
Great, well, welcome. Thanks, everybody. I think I've got my notes sorted out here, so a few things I want to talk about. Talk about new state forester Casey, who is now in place as of March 2nd, I believe, of this month as state forester. She wanted to let everyone know. I actually met her at our leadership team meeting yesterday. So she came there and spoke with us. She will be working between now and June. Be working 2 weeks here, 2 weeks in Nevada, because she has her youngest daughter graduating from high school. She wanted to be there for part of that. So she's going to be back and forth. I think she's here last week and this week in Nevada 2 weeks. So she wanted everybody to know that she's excited to start. She wants to get going. She's already getting going. She's been meeting. I know she's met with AOL. She's met with OFRE. They are LFIC, governor's office. I don't know how many different times. So she's out meeting all the partners outside the agency. I don't know if she's met with us. She met with us too, right, Mike?
We're meeting on Monday with some of us.
So she can meet folks. Part of the required, what the governor's office has asked you to do is actually get out into the state and actually start meeting folks. So she'll be traveling around the state probably for the next few months. So she said hi briefly to us, but she's often going around the state, traveling around a bit. So just a little background. She's had 25 years of experience in forestry, starting most of it in Nevada, but she did a little bit in Peace Corps, and I'm not sure where at the Peace Corps, maybe Nepal or something like that. But then she worked mostly with the state forestry there in Nevada, and then worked up to their deputy state forester, and then to the state forester. She's been state forester for about since 2018 out there in Nevada. Dealt with a lot of fire over there. She's actually, yesterday she was saying she mimicked their fire fighting efforts on Oregon's and how we set up our firefighting crews and everything. Because they thought what we did was actually very effective and efficient. So that's how they set up their firefighting folks over there in Nevada, which was, I guess, a good compliment to how we fight fire here in Oregon. She's going to move, like I said, in June. Her first appearance was with the Board of Forestry on the 4th, which was last week. That was her first Board of Forestry meeting. So I think she did fairly well there. Let's see. There's a few things the governor's office likes her to focus on. I think some of the partners as well. One of those, there's a federal terms and conditions that are coming with our federal grants. It's something that we have to figure out as an agency. There's with the passage of, I believe it was House Resolution 1, big beautiful bill that actually adds language to our federal grants that we have to be careful of when we sign up for those. She has to run that through the agency. So I'm only telling you that. So if the federal grants are taking a little bit longer to get out to you, that's what's going on. So we have to run this through the governor's office to make sure we're all on alignment with what's going on there. Second part is austerity measures. We're still in that. We will be probably through the next biennium, so through 2029, still be in austerity measures, stately, kind of watching our expenditures as it needs. Those don't include the grants, but just our normal day-to-day activities. And then prioritization of meetings, which I already mentioned. So, that's what I got on case. If there's any questions on the state forester. Does have a sense of humor. I heard that, and then she came out yesterday, but she does have a sense of humor. So.
She wants to see real trees too.
I think so.
So.
Oh, and I forgot the other thing she'd be working on too are the executive orders 25, 26, 25, 29. It's the governor's, that's how they're supporting the agency, and it's important that the agency fits into that. I heard mentioned the governor would like to pursue carbon markets. That's one thing I heard. I'm not sure what that's all about. I'm looking at Amanda too, because I know she knows a little bit more about this as well. But we'll be engaging as an agency, all agencies statewide, not resource, will be engaging in these executive orders across the state. So I don't know much more about that. I think they're meeting, and Tim Holschbach is meeting with the governor's office, a couple of other agencies yesterday, today, and tomorrow to kind of figure out what that's all about. So hopefully maybe by next CFF, I'll have a little bit more on what those executive orders will be. That's how we, as an agency.
I'd say if it's okay, Wendy, it might be nice to have Tim come and speak to this group. Because a big part of the executive order 2526 is defining what like resiliency is. And there could be a unique perspective from the family forest landowner perspective to add in. So just a thought.
Is it possible to say something broadly about sort of the fiscal aspects of that? Because that came with no funding and it's a time of budget pinches. And so I'm assuming this is integrated with your normal work, but any thoughts or comments? That seems somewhat challenging to do a new line of work without additional funds in a budgetary pinch. So
Yeah, we did not receive any additional funding. With that, though, just kind of go into the legislative session, we did do fairly well as an agency. We did not lose any funding. I believe the cameras were, the only thing we were going to lose was not necessarily the cameras themselves, but the service provided by the company out of University of Oregon. They're the ones that keep the cameras going. We actually got pass-through money for them to keep
Uh-huh.
the wildfire cameras going. So it's pass-through there, but that was about the only piece of our budget I think we're gonna lose, but then came back. Everything else is base level, is what we call it. So, you know, next long session, they're not, we can ask for general fund funding, but chances are zero or close to zero. Get it unless it's an emergency or something. So yeah, it's pretty slim.
Mhm.
But no additional funding came, but we'll be doing it. I guess that's what Tim gets to help figure out is how we're going to be doing this for
Yeah.
the agencies. We'll be relying upon partners too, so like right too. So that's Casey legislative session. I asked for a brief summary and Derek Wheeler gave me about 4 pages. So
Yeah.
so it ended Friday. For those Sunday night was Friday evening. Everything had to be done by then. Short sessions, for those who don't know, typically are policy tweaks and budget adjustments. Although legislature still try and use it as an opportunity to try and get policy proposals done, but it's typically just to kind of adjust our budgets. Okay, I already talked about HR1. So the effects of that HR1 will, it's the effects of HR1, Big Beautiful Bill. It will, see if I get this correct, it will decouple us from the federal tax code, which means that, which Oregon mirrors the federal tax code, which will have new tax reductions at the Oregon state level. So what that does is we had a $750 million deficit with that happening. When they get the new forecast from the Treasury office, we were yeah, they got to about 750 million, about $650 million gap for the budget going into the long cycle for next year. So that's why we're doing the austerity measures to try and get that gap down even more. With decoupling from the federal code, it actually allows the state to pull back, I think, 290 million in revenue because of that. Now, I don't know how that all works. It's just kind of with here described as unless you understand it better. I do, Amanda.
Yeah, I mean, I can describe a little bit for folks and Mike may be able to as well. But basically, the legislature passed Senate Bill 1507, which a part of that is that on a biannual basis, the legislature has to affirm the coupling of the Oregon tax code to the federal tax code. That coupling bill got amended to decouple a handful of items that were included in HR1 in the One Big Beautiful Bill. And that included bonus depreciation, which is being able to depreciate investments and assets from your business the year that you make them. So like AOL was we spoke and testified on that piece particularly because we make a lot of high cost purchases for equipment that could have otherwise been depreciated that first year. Now they have to be on a depreciation schedule as they would have been previously. So for Oregon, that was a big piece, or the reasoning there was that that would have potentially been lost tax revenue for the state. So they decoupled from that. They also decoupled from the vehicle tax credit, or I might not be getting I'm not a CPA guy, so don't hold me to every single word I say. But and that's the credit for if you purchase a vehicle that's manufactured in final assembly in the United States. So that piece was decoupled. And then there was 1 or 2 other pieces that were decoupled. I can't remember exactly every piece from 1507, but I know those were 2 of the larger pieces that were discussed. Of note, a few items that remained coupled that were in HR1 is the overtime and tips tax pieces. So those pieces for the low income folks in the state remain. So no tax on overtime and no tax on tips. So Oregon did retain those pieces. So it wasn't a full 100% decoupling from what happened at the federal level. But there was a few things that the legislature and the governor's office felt were strategic to try to bridge that revenue forecast gap. So.
How much did it pull in again, the uncoupling? You said some
It's
number.
like 290 million.
Okay.
We're asking 290.
That is my as unbiased report as I can give, because I have a lot of other feelings.
Yeah, no, I would have Eric here, but he's busy. I think he's still busy with the outcomes of the legislature. But as far as, like I said, with our agency, we had 0 budget reductions. The money coming back. Out of all the natural resource agencies. The House Bill 5204 is the main budget bill for the agency. I'm not going to go into the details there. It's a lot of just kind of, like I said, it's usually we're adjusting our budgets. So we are adjusting kind of our appropriations and our limitations, both decreasing and increasing, getting rid of positions, adding positions. That's kind of what the short session is to realign the budget with the workload that's out there and the funding we have. So that's kind of what we did that's the easiest way to describe what we did with our needs. For those who want to know, Senate Bill 1507 allows the purchase of Aberglaw Falls. It's sitting with Parks right now. And we'll leave it there with Parks. So
getting back to
yeah.
the budget issues, was there any update on the effects on S-Fish or the MC program?
Let's see. I don't think any of those were. Oh, you mean like giving back the money coming back?
Yeah, getting back to where they should be.
Yeah, I believe we offer up a portion of that, and that should be in the budget now.
Well,
Yeah, I mean, Mike may know more closely, but I believe SFIsh and AMC both were unscathed. The bigger thing with AMC is that there's the letter from the governor's office that basically said, until such time that ODF gets the ITP, they're gonna continue to withhold some funds.
Yeah, this is a bit of what he's treated.
Yeah, so, which is sort of separate than this other conversation, but as far as the legislature is concerned, they didn't cut those programs.
I just remember the S-Fish, for example, it's supposed to be around 10 million. It came out at 6 something, and then it was projected to go down to 2. And I'm just wondering,
Yeah.
Can't fund a double culvert for that.
Yeah, they didn't add to it.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah, they didn't cut, but they didn't add, so, and it looks like Mike's given the thumb up, so I don't know if you want to add anything, Mike?
Nope, that's what I know.
Like pseudo, Darren whisperers here.
We'll see, there's a couple others. One of those was for the harvesting on state forest grounds. Corrected, it narrowed the scope, sorry, it's the right language, of the potential litigants for that. Those who could sue state forests if they don't cut the harvest that they want them to cut. So changed, it was broadly, everybody could do it, and then they said, nope, only these folks can do it. That did. House Bill 4004 was around with this bill, house agriculture. This is the one that relates to the Douglas fir mortality down in Southwest Oregon. And the bill, it went through many iterations. That where it ended up is they are creating a pilot program for landowners who've experienced Douglas fir mortality on their property and want to transition out of the small tract forest land classification. Will no longer have to immediately pay back the small forest land tax deferral back taxes in that area. I think it is for that area of the state.
I'll let Mike take that.
Is that correct, Mike?
Yeah, say it again, Mike. You described it as
Okay.
far as I know it. And it sunsets here and very shortly. So it gives us more time in the off season to try and improve it.
Yeah, but it's just for the Medford area, or is it statewide?
No, I don't think it has a geographic. It's definitely aimed at the Medford area, but it doesn't specify that in the bill, to my knowledge.
And that was it. There's another one here for emergency preparedness. That was with the giving funding and setting up the SST, which exists just the link just down the street from us here. To set them up as an Oregon Disaster Recovery Authority, the Office of the Governor, and a training facility for disaster. So,
Any kinds of disaster, earthquakes,
yeah,
fire.
disaster, yeah. Private Forest Accord. So at the Board of Forestry meeting. Okay. The only thing we had left, well, the final piece of the private forest accord was the tethered logging portion of it. If you remember, the Board of Forestry went out and visited Warehouser land to go to look at the tethered logging machines on the hillside. And what we were doing, the last piece that needed to happen, there are several scenarios that the board was given, and the only one I remember is A, because that's the one they voted on. But what they were looking for is to decide whether a PFAP, kind of close by, see if I can say whether a PFAP was needed still for a tethered logging machine on steep slopes. That's the first piece. That's the first question. Second question was whether private plan for alternate practice was needed for that same machine on HL slopes. So those two questions. That's what the board needed to answer, and they needed to know whether or not additional rulemaking needed to be done to make that happen. So what they agreed to is that the PFAP is not needed for the tethered logging machine within 100 feet of an RMA stream, because they found that there was no degradation of soil from that machine when it was working on the hillside. However, if you have another machine that needs to put a spur road in or something else within 100 feet of that stream side, like you take a cat, you put a spur road in, you still need to do a PFAP for the cat. So it's just specific to logging machines, steep slopes. Okay. Then the other piece was the HLHL, which still requires the PFAP for if you're on the highland side due to the resource and public safety. Yeah, public safety. And then I believe they went with that decision. Board of Forestry, they had the caveat, they would like an annual report on tethered logging across the state, based upon how well it's doing.
They just want to get
For next 5 years.
yeah, they want to get a report out on citations, on enforcement actions.
Either way,
Yeah, they landed on enforcement actions as the main mechanism there.
but it's the next 5 years. It's an annual report. And then I haven't had conservation plan. I asked Kyle about that. It's still with the services. They're still working on it. I know Jennifer Weichel still heavily engaged with the authors are still engaged. Everybody's still engaged with that. Right.
Is this a Western State Forest type of conversation about?
No, this is the private forest.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know where state forest is. I didn't ask them on their
Okay.
site. It's like a race. I think Mike is pushing us back. So, anyway.
Okay, but back to the PFA.
Yeah, so
Okay.
PFA is used with the services. It's still on track as far as I know, so I haven't heard any deadlines. Unless, have you, Mike, are there any deadlines with the services?
Well, I think the real concern is that it's going to take a long time and that the services aren't working on it very much, especially the Fish and Wildlife Service has no capacity. So the effort that the governor's office and the Private Forest Accord authors are working on is to get some sense of urgency there to push that forward. And the concern is that they won't get it done by the deadline, which would mean in a long session, we'd have to ask for an extension. No one wants to try and go for an extension of the PFA deadlines. So the full court press is to try and help the services either reprioritize or get more capacity to move that forward. We'll see.
And the final note I have is just action program. They are preparing for fire season, hiring on seasonals, and then they have our team meetings next week with the team members. So all that ready So we'll try and have 3 teams available for upcoming fire season. Everybody's nervous that we have. See where fire season goes. We go either way right now. People are leaning toward an early fire season right now. So that's all I got.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Any follow-up questions?
I just have one addition,
Sure.
maybe, if that's okay, Wendy. On the fire piece, we met, AOL met with Chief Fennessy, the new chief of the new Department of Interior, US Wildland Fire Service, I think is what they're called, last week. And they're gonna be meeting with the Department of Forestry, I believe, in a week or so in Eastern Oregon. Last I talked to Kyle Williams. And so, what we talked to them about, and I'm sure ODF will talk to them about, is the continuation of the Western Oregon Operating Plan, which allows ODF to protect BLM lands, the ONC BLM lands in that checkerboard. So for those that are small landowners that are within that checkerboard, protected by ODF, we believe there to be a huge benefit there to continue to do that. I think there's still a lot of questions out there as far as where the fire service fits with the land management side of BLM. So they're 2 separate agencies now within the Department of Interior. And so how actions occur on their land, who's, determining the IFPL, who's sitting on different committees at ODF is still kind of unknown exactly how that's gonna play out. But Chief Fennessy is at the National Wildfire Suppression Association annual meeting right now in Reno, Nevada. So there's conversations happening there. Don't know if anybody from ODF is at that. There typically have been partners across different state agencies. I think OFIC and AOL have folks that are there as well. So anyway, just another highlight on, kind of a somewhat, a little bit of a shift, but from what Chief Fennessy told us is that we shouldn't see any changes from the DOI side as far as fire season is concerned. Their interest and the administration's interest is keeping fires small, not having a managed wildfire, going after it, attacking it, and maintaining the good relationship that they have with the department. So anyways, just a little additional there.
That is correct. Yeah, they are going to be there talking about.
Yeah.
So I want to point out one thing in that, and that it's the fact that they split the deal on 2 pieces. So this is not a district level. This is up at the region level. I like region 6 type level. And instead of talking to just one person now, I'm talking to 2 different people about, what's going on with landscape resiliency and what's going on in BLM lands. They've got 2 people you got to work with now on a regional level. Well, maybe it's not me, maybe it's Josh or somebody. So they've had a bit of complexity to how we get our partnership.
Yeah, that was supposed to be simpler.
Yes. Yeah. But anyway, we got to figure that piece out because I think the fire piece is obviously going with the fire protection program. We just don't have figured out their land management piece and where it fits with ODF.
Yeah, like for instance, I asked them, are you guys gonna be doing consultation with the BLM on, resiliency needs or where to place fuel breaks and different things for their NEPA, and they don't know how that's gonna work. It does add complexity for us as partners working with the BLM, but.
It's good to hear that we actually have one piece that's solidified because for a while there, it still makes you imagine it separated, going back together. And I said fire service would be good. So that's just gotta get you figured out.
Yeah.
It's some time.
I hear you. I hear you.
Okay, that's good.
Okay, thank you so much. Thanks, Mike, and thanks, Amanda, for all the brief
I really
summaries.
have her if she's downtown.
Put together.
Let's see, right on time. The next item we have is Forest Legacy Program updates, and we're looking to Chris Scott and Christina Halligan for that.
Right, thank you guys for having us. Thank you, Wendy. So again, my name is Christina Hellige, and I'm the Forest Legacy Program Administrator. And I'll let Chris introduce himself.
Chris Scott, Forest Legacy Forester.
So we're here just to give a program update. I think Amy used to come to these on a somewhat regular basis and give updates. And so we're hoping to start doing that again as well. So starting off with what we're going to present today. Maybe. Just kidding. Okay. So first off, is there,
Oh, microphone. Each.
is there anyone here that has never heard of the Forest Legacy Program or knows what it's about? Perfect. Okay, everyone's at least heard of it, so that's good. So this is just an overview, kind of what we're going to touch base on today. Give an update on Oregon's Forest Legacy accomplishments, projects we're working on currently, and then recently or soon to be recently funded FY26 projects. Chris is going to touch a little bit on the different acquisition methods through the program. Again, touch more on 2025 accomplishments, and then kind of looking forward what's upcoming with the Forest Legacy Program and kind of involving you guys too and our regular updates with you. So next one is just, this is a table of Oregon's Forest Legacy accomplishments and a map of where they are throughout the state. As you can see, our most recent project, which we're going to talk a little bit about later on, is the Tualatin Mountain Forest. That was a project with TPL. Oregon State University purchased it, and it is their most recent research forest. Oh, thank you, Mike. That's really helpful. Yes. So that's the most recent project that we just completed last year. Not shown on here is our current Columbia Gorge Forest project, which is near the Dalles. And then coming up in FY26, that budget is officially released. We'll have 2 more projects, one by Ashland and then one in Eastern Oregon. So yeah, that's kind of, and we could talk all day about all these projects. So if anyone wants to deep dive, we're more than happy to at another time. So that's kind of the history of the projects in Oregon and kind of where we're going with recent projects and the pipeline of projects coming in.
And I'll talk about the different kind of acquisition methods that the Forest Legacy Program has. So historically, our biggest strength has been our fee title acquisitions, where it's a willing landowner that's looking at divesting from their forest land. They can put together a Forest Legacy project, and title must be held by a non-federal government and non-tribal government entity. So it could be anything from state government. We've acquired the Gilbert State Forest with Forest Legacy funding years back, all the way down to the Arch Cape Forest for the Arch Cape watershed is the title holder for that project. It's a nationally competitive funding program, so projects are competing against every other state's when it comes to funding. And the projects, they must promote working forests and public recreation. So the other avenue we have for acquisitions are conservation easements, and those are where the private landowners maintain, they continue to hold title on the property, and we will then typically the ODF will hold the easements on the property and be partners then going forward, where you'll manage you can be, if it's a funded application, you can be funded for the conservation value of your property, and ODF will come and annually monitor your property to ensure compliance with the conservation easement, and really just partnership going forward to help each other best manage your forests. That program is also, it's competitive if you want it funded. However, if you would like a conservation easement for the sake of succession planning, or to have an easement on your property, you could donate the conservation value to have an easement, and then be able to write the value of that off. And that makes it a non-competitive project then, where we don't have to wait for funding decisions. And then we can also use that value as in-kind cost share for our larger Forest Legacy projects.
And then one note really quick too, just on how competitive the program is becoming. I was actually on the national review panel this last 2027, I think it was. And they had so much money set aside, and the total ask for all the applications was like 2.5 times what we had. So it's becoming more and more competitive as the word of the program gets out there, which is a good thing. But that kind of speaks to if someone wants to do this in the donation, we're not up against those competitive applications all across the country. So
Where in the federal government does funding come from?
the U.S. Forest Service.
Land and Water Conservation Fund is the funding source for that. So. Yeah, and as Christina said, it's highly competitive, and every year it just seems to be more and more competitive, especially within recent years. We had increased funding because of IRA funding, which made the increase the popularity of the program, and now we're dwindled back to our traditional LWCF funding cycle. And so it's causing us to try to have to be more creative to make our projects as competitive as possible. So sometimes that might mean partnering packaging up projects together. So instead of having 7 or 8 smaller projects compete for the 3 that we can apply for every year, may combine a couple of the smaller ones to make a bigger project, to make it more nationally competitive so we can still get that funding. It is a 75% cost share program, meaning that 25% must come from non-federal cost share. However, that can come as in-kind contribution. So if smaller forest landowners want to donate their easement, that counts as that in-kind cost share, where the Forest Service will pick up that grant. It is time consuming. It's a minimum of 2 years from the application to funding and going through all the steps. It's a lot of work, and there are a lot of unknowns with it. That's why it's best having all your ducks in a row before preparing for an application, because there's a lot of unknowns. The other thing is having a realistic value with it. All these properties are appraised off of the Yellow Book appraisal, which is the federal government's appraisal process. And for any of you that are familiar with that, sometimes it can be tedious and vary greatly from what your perceived value of the property is as well. Again, the donation, it's non-competitive. It's donated, you can write it off, and it contributes to the larger projects across the landscape. Tualatin Mountain Forest is a prime example. It was a 3,110 acre forest that was previously owned by Weyerhaeuser along Skyline Road and Rocky Point Road in the Tualatin Mountain area, if any of you are familiar. And we Trust for Public Land helped put an application together for MSU to take full title on this. And when it came to cost share, that was where we're having difficulty coming up with the remainder of the funding for this large project. And fortunately, due to the amazing land trust community we have, North Coast Land Conservancy stepped up, and they have a rainforest reserve outside of Arch Cape that they've been holding for conservation purposes, and they offered to donate a conservation easement for a portion of their rainforest reserve to qualify for the cost share to Tualatin Mountain Forest purchase.
And another note really quick on that as well. Another way that we can get cost share too is part of this was leftover cost share from our Minum project back in 2023. So that's another way that other projects can help future projects. If there's any extra cost share, it can roll over as long as all parties are in agreement. So like Rocky Mountain Elk, ODFW, they were able to agree and also donated leftover cost share for this. So.
And that's what Christina and I try and do as well, is to help bridge the gap with the cost share, because it's not easy trying to come up with that extra 25%. And sometimes it just takes being creative and looking at other ways to be able to pull that cost share from. So don't let that be your burden if you do have it or interested in the legacy project. Another project we did this year was our virtual reality field tour of the Minum River Wildlife Area. It was that was a project that would FY23.
Yes.
The FY23 project, 17,000 acre wildlife area in total is what it is. It's very remote, very rugged. We wanted to be able to get a tour out there, but with as remote as it was, it was going to take multiple days to do, and getting timing of Committee for Family Forestry or Board of Forestry is very difficult to account for something like that, get days to do it. So brought a film crew out and captured 12 hours of footage to make a 5-minute virtual reality field tour. However, that footage, the method behind the madness for that excess B-roll footage is for future documentaries that we're going to make if it had that excess footage. So what this VR field tour does is it essentially brings you to the forest. It is such an immersive, captivating experience. It gives you the depth and sounds, and it's not going to replace the forest, but it's just enough that it'll make you itch to go out and see the mine in real life. And so if any of you are interested in seeing that, please let me know, and I'd love to show you.
It's such a great use of 5 minutes.
You do need the headset on?
I've got a headset, so we can hear the break, something we can.
Okay, yeah,
Watch that.
yeah, no, I think all of it.
Sounds fun.
Yeah, the miners.
Yes, just be careful, sit down.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it's gonna be in a swivel chair.
Yes, yes. Don't wait.
Well, we can use it.
Sorry, Chris.
No, you're okay. So the other update for us is our Forest Legacy Programs Assessment of Need. This is document, title of the document says what it is. It's the assessment of need for Oregon's Forest Legacy Program. It is a requirement as a part of Forest Legacy Program guidelines for every state to have an assessment of need. Ours was completed in about 20 years ago, a little over 20 years ago, when we initially opted into the Forest Legacy Program. Unfortunately, since that 20 years, we haven't had the ability to properly update the assessment of need because we're still trying to wrap our heads around the best way to leverage the Forest Legacy Program for Oregon. And as well, prior to Christina and myself, it was just Amy Singh as a 3/4 time employee, so she didn't have the resources to be able to do an effective update. So the assessment need is managed very similar to a typical forest management plan, where you do a review at 5 years and then an update every 10 years. So 2025 was the review cycle for most every state. To get on in line with that, we did a review of ours to find all the weaknesses and the areas that we can improve our assessment need, to have a strong document that lines out the strategy for Oregon's Forest Legacy Program to be completed by 2030. So the reality is it's going to take a couple of years to do the due diligence and everything to do a proper update. So what we spent 2025 was wrapping our heads around what was going to be, we're going to be looking at for 2030. And upcoming, so CFF involvement, that's part of why we're here. So we've been, historically, the Forest Legacy Committee has been a subcommittee of CFF, and we've become somewhat removed from CFF and haven't been able to give you guys proper updates. So we're trying to lump some things together where we can update you guys with this here, and then also involve you in our new application cycle. So when we have our new applications coming in June, we'd like to present them to the Committee for Family Forestry to get your guys' input as well on those projects moving forward. And then give you guys regular updates at meetings so we can be here as well to help better serve you guys too, because part of the history with the Forest Legacy Program, it's got a stigma that it's for larger forest lands. Well, only larger forest lands, and we can help. There is a lot of room where we can help the small forest land owners. It just might be, we might have to get creative to do it. It's not going to be as easy as just putting together a conservation easement application for 100-acre forest land you own. But if you're interested in a conservation easement moving forward, give us a call and talk to us, and we'd love to see how we can work together. Sure. And
Can I
then
take a sec just to mention the group you're talking about? I think like part of the Forest Legacy Program, as I understand it, is that you have to have a state committee that links to the program, and that's the committee you're talking about. I think that this was a separate committee until like 2020, at which point it was created under CFF as a subgroup. As the people on CFF probably know, like we don't interact with that working group very much. And the working group, as I recall, was a pretty big one, like with 20 people or something like that. And so convening it like once a year, I think has been a little bit of a challenge of getting a hold of people, making sure everyone's on top of it. So I have the impression that there's some work going on, sort of trying to maybe raise awareness on CFF of that committee and kind of keep a core group of people who'll be available maybe a couple times a year to focus on forest legacy. Is that correct?
yeah, pretty much exactly, because part of the issue we've had with our subcommittee prior was that have that engagement involvement from the committee throughout the year where it's such kind of a light need where we meet once to review, to look at applications and then another time to rank applications. It gives the rest of the committee, the whole rest of the year to forget about Forest Legacy program. So this kind of gets everybody talking about it the whole time. And hopefully we get, whatever, whether it's subcommittee or however it plays out, who's the members are going to rank our Forest Legacy projects. Hopefully they at least, whether they're a member of CFF or not, they at least watch these meetings to get our needs as well. This is a good place to.
So I think that, can I add to that really quick? So subwork group.
Yes, a subgroup of the CFF.
Oh,
Yeah.
but yeah, so with the group, so what's going on is that group used to be a standing committee, but they were in Department of Forestry. Through the years, it's traditionally just kind of, say it's falling apart. It's not an effective committee. So we're trying to figure, so it's added in as a support group to CFF. What we're trying to do, I know Katie and I had this conversation yesterday, trying to figure out how we can fit it in with CFF, not necessarily having CFF do it. Support group still do that. And this is the few key players on that support group on the CFF. So we got to figure out how to make that work and keep it, a way to describe, keep it, words here. I want to make sure it's done correctly on that support group. So that's a piece of probably having to engage you and Katie and myself and a couple of other folks to figure out how we want to set that up later on. So,
I was thinking about this. I don't know, I've never seen your assessment methodology, but is there some sort of prioritization process? So for example, all the different forest types, landscapes and all that, are you seeking out, various habitats and whatnot that, somebody that has 100 acres may have just what you need. And so we would just need to, go after those folks and see if they're interested.
because I think the caveat, it has to be threatened by development is one of them.
It doesn't have to be development specifically. It can be any threat to loss in any capacity. So I think development's been the biggest one, but it can be threat to loss in any fire, anything.
So and that's what we've been also looking, because in the past, we've been trying to stretch a little bit to push showing that threat of loss to development in some of these forested areas that really don't have much of that threat to loss to development. So what we're also pushing now on these for these properties is to demonstrate the threat of loss to fire, because the reality is these unmanaged forests, if they continue going unmanaged, the fuel loading becomes so heavy that when something does go off, it burns so hot, it turns into a moonscape that's growing vegetation for a couple of decades. So it's just a matter of demonstrating a threat of loss is all the Forest Legacy program is.
One thing we haven't mentioned is that these areas have to be within the Forest Legacy areas on the map. So, well, you could say that, yeah.
No,
There's a map that shows the lands that qualify for this program, and they're big swatches of the state. But the land has to be within that map area.
And that's something we can change too. I think our map was developed in 2001, I think it was. So that's something we can look at as well when we're looking at, priorities is, do these areas still fit?
Is there a webpage or a book or something that a guy can
Yeah,
get and read this thing?
yeah, I can send Heather information and she can send it out to the group if that's the easiest way. Okay.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because I'm thinking that it seems like the timing's perfect because you're going to talk about trust land stuff too,
we did
because
this on purpose.
it's but it is such a consistent concern. I mean, what succession has been a constant thread through a lot of small woodland owner organizations for the last number of years. I mean, as the cohort of people owning these lands gets older and older, and the folks maybe not wanting to take them on that are the young, that younger generation. So as many different avenues as people can find to not have us lose forest land.
Right.
I mean, we're losing enough of it to fire all the time and all the other neglect that's happening. But to, if there are ways that we can help as a committee for that sort of proactive, let's not lose more forests.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Especially, and I know there are some of this, it's my hobby horse, right? But some of the smalls, because, some of us we don't have big forests, but we also care that they don't get lost.
Right. And that's why we've been trying to figure out how to incorporate small forest landowners better with Forest Legacy program, because it's not that we can't help you guys. It's just that we have to be more creative in how we do. And then I think to wrap up my part, so we're also planning later this year a celebration event field tour for the Arch for North Coast Land Conservancy for their Arch Cape Rainforest Reserve that which previously mentioned came in the we've used that as cost share for the Tuolip Mountain Forest as well as Arch Cape Forest. They North Coast Land Conservancy's been a great partner for us and just by purely donating conservation value of land to help projects go through. And it's kind of, we're just wanting to give them a big thank you and show them a shout of appreciation for what they've done, as well as introduce as many other people as we can to them to hear more about their rainforest reserve and their mission. So that stay tuned for upcoming dates on that. We haven't picked the date yet, but we plan on trying to send it.
And then kind of the last thing we wanted to touch on, just so everyone's kind of aware, this is unofficial because we haven't got the official call for projects from the Forest Service yet. But going into FY28 application timeline, we do ask that we have pre-application consultations with project partners or potential project partners by May 15th. And that just kind of, we meet one-on-one or with the group and we just kind of hear about a project that you're thinking of submitting. We can ask questions. We can kind of figure out what's your long-term game plan. Do you have cost share figured out? Do you have a landowner figured out? Application deadline to ODF would be June 1st. And I put that as a date right now because that gives us time then when you guys have your next meeting, which is June 10th, we could come to you and present the applications that were submitted to ODF. And again, that just kind of helps us come on a regular basis and update you guys on where we're at. The Western FLP peer review would be in August 2026, and that's just where I take these applications and it kind of goes to a federal and state-led mock review panel in a way. So it's a great way for us to get feedback on the applications. And then again, we don't have an exact date from the Forest Service, but the regional Forest Service deadline is usually mid-September sometime. And then we'd hear final funding with the president's budget for FY28, which we all know that could come out months later or a year later, who knows when. So that's kind of where we're at for the FY28 application. And pretty much all we had today for you guys. So we really appreciate your guys' time.
Yeah.
If there's any questions.
Feel free to reach out to us anytime.
Any questions from others? I have a question, but I'll let others go first if they want to. My comment is that, so I tend to think of like, State Forester and Mukomoto, of like, to my mind, sort of focused on this program and worked on, with the department on finding more FTE to be devoted to this program. So it sounds to me like you are able now to expand your capability to hold conservation easements, say, as compared to 10 years ago. Would you say that's true? And how is that gonna, you partly answered this, but how do you expect that to change the way that the program looks from ODF's perspective in terms of like creating the capability to hold those easements and add acreages where you're holding the conservation easement?
And one thing too that I'll kind of touch on to kind of answer that question, because we are working towards that. We would love to be able to take full advantage of the program and just be a willing holder for every conservation easement.
Yeah.
But we actually worked with Coalition of Oregon Land Trust and Oregon Ag Trust, and we got a nice report put together for us on kind of what it would take for ODF to hold more easements. And that's kind of cost long-term, cost if there's any violations. So we're kind of working through that. And we kind of wanted to wait a little bit till our new state forester was on board to kind of present that in a more broad way to like the Board of Forestry and Casey. So that is something we are working towards. We haven't got there quite yet, but that is what we are hopefully going to do. And I think it's going to be a slow process. We're definitely past the point of saying no, ODF's not holding easements, and kind of more on a case by case to more of like, yes, please apply, and then we'll, review it with leadership. So I think we're definitely still getting there. It's a process. It's not a quick process, as I'm sure everyone knows. But that's where we're at. So.
And the workload for these, so conservation easements is one thing, that's probably the easier one for us to hold. The other piece, the other one, the e-title, actually adds quite a bit of the work to the department. So it depends upon what goes into that project. So if it's just a basic, we will leave a 100-foot buffer on streams, that's easy to check. But if it's 100 here, 50 there, changes throughout the entire property, somebody actually has to go physically verify that those are still there. that adds to the workload somewhere. That's kind of the ask that we're just is. But
Yeah. And that's kind of one thing we're working on too, is we have a draft easement template that we're gonna have reviewed by ODF and DOJ. And again, because we don't want to make it complicated on our monitors that go out. We just kind of want it simple. I mean, granted, we're willing to work with partners, so if there is something that they want, we can make exceptions as we work through it, but yeah.
they twisted my arm to take me out to mine them.
Complain the whole way.
Very joyful complaining.
It was an incredible piece of property.
Mine is fee title, right? Yeah, it's owned by the state.
Owned by ODFW.
Yeah.
What do you have to do? It's great farming for those guys.
Yeah.
That's what I was gonna ask. My question was gonna be, is there a working relationship with other agencies for these, like ODFW in particular? I'm working on a project now where they're involved, something like this.
Yeah, ODF and W Act, I don't know the exact mechanics of it, but they have a shared forester between ODF and W and ODF. And she helps them on that project quite a bit. So she kind of shares her time between ODF and W issues and ODF issues, and she's great at both, so.
I think these projects, I mean, they often have a lot of partners. It's from like Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, weren't they like pivotal in helping put together this Minor River project? Because it's elk habitat, lower elevation elk habitat attaching to the whole
So
Flowers area.
exactly. So pretty much any forest legacy project that comes to us is one we're going to have to identify if it's going to be a fee title project, who's going to be the fee title holder. And then automatically, pretty much, we're going to want to partner you up with either a land trust or somebody like Rocky Mountain Elk or somebody else that can help you do all this legwork to put an application together, because it is a lot of legwork to do your due diligence to have a strong application.
And I guess when we say application too, it's actually like a 4 or 5 page document. It's not like a sheet of paper, you just answer some questions. So there is a lot that goes into it. You have to talk about threat. Space on the other categories now, but it's a long document. So, and it has a detailed map that goes with it. So it's not just a quick application. It takes a good couple months or two. And that's why we have the mock review panel, so that it helps us put it, the strongest applications forward.
And the thing that impressed me about this mining one going out there is we talk about conservation, but it's conservation, keep it as a first. It's the best way to put it. We were out there and they were already out there cutting, they're brush piles. They were going to burn. They were actually thinning the stands of trees out to actually produce logs to put on the market to get it out of there. So it keeps it as a work down there. It's the direction they were going with that property was the right direction.
Yeah. And that's definitely the theme of the program, is keep working for us working. So.
So is that, this is a separate program that the community forest program that the Forest Service administers? Or-
They're like sister programs.
Okay.
So we don't do anything with the community forest program, but the applications come to me and a state forester, but we don't review them. We just kind of pass them along and then get submitted back to the Forest Service. The community forest program has a much lower amount that people can ask for. I think it's 500,000 or 750,000. So they're kind of sister programs, very similar, but we do not specifically like do anything with the community forest program.
I think it shows up with our protection program. They work kind of hand in hand. So it's I think. So
And there's landscape scale grants thing that El DeVos helped me with project. Is that related in any way to any of this? I'm trying to get my arms around all these.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
yeah, it's probably closer related to WPPs.
Okay.
Katie, did you have a comment on it? You look like you're thinking about.
Oh, no, I'm just getting ready.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
But I will say we are working on a video series with the training team. They have a videographer there, and we're trying to incorporate all of the programs ODF is involved in, all 15 programs in one video. So, there's all these teams and silos within ODF, and that's not really relevant for the landowners. We're trying to put them all together in one space to provide information. It's going to be a 4-part series to provide high-level information on each program and for the points of contact that the landowner can go to. Hopefully in the next couple of months. But it will include LSR, Legacy, and 13 other programs.
That'd be cool, just to be able to get an idea of, like this org chart that we're working on, if you've got a person, you've got all these different programs that one could apply to, but which one's relevant, which one's not.
And it's even more complicated because some programs you're just working with ODF and some programs you're working with ODF and and multiple federal agencies. So it can be really confusing for the landowner.
So when the video series is ready, we can do it, have an extra meeting and bring the popcorn and we can all help with the screening. We can do the pre-screening. But I mean, that's partly funny, but partly serious, because the more we see these things, the more we can share that information, because it's hard knowing how hard it is for us to get some of our own basic information out about what's the difference between Oregon Tree Farm System and Oregon Small Woodlands Association among woodland owners. It's like, as you start adding more and more to the alphabet soup and to the different possible programs, it's like, it starts to feel like something that's impossible to swim through. And for many people, they just stop. You just kind of hit this point, too much information. So it's an overload situation. And Tia started doing this thing with me when she can't focus anymore. She's like, wall of words. It's all just a wall of words. Yeah. If we can help people break through that.
Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah. I was just gonna ask, I meet somewhat regularly with OWEB as well, and they have, I think, 3 or 4 acquisition programs as well for watershed restoration and habitat protection. And so I don't know how much you guys engage with them, where there could be overlap. Like, I don't work with OWEB as much as I do ODF. And so it's kind of been a new revelation for me of how many programs they actually have on acquisition. I just didn't even know.
There are a couple projects we have that OWEB's the cost share funding partner on them. They are difficult though to get. It's a realistic management plan that meets Forest Legacy needs and OWEB needs. It's been kind of a hang up in the past, but I think we're trying to work that. Both doing.
That'd be a great source of funding. Yeah.
To answer your question, I do engage with Eric quite a bit.
Okay,
Trying to make those connections. Yes,
okay.
definitely.
Yeah, and I met with their director a few months ago and they were asking the kind of partners what our perspectives were on different programs. And, I was pretty frank with them that some of their criteria on what determines whether or not a landscape is at risk, that doesn't necessarily align with our organization, taking land out of production. And I suggested maybe they coordinate with Forest Legacy or look at Forest Legacy to create more alignment, more agreement between different partners and organizations on what they qualify as they, we're having this discussion kind of overshadowed by the budget discussions and the shortfalls with the revenue forecast, which obviously have changed a little bit, but some of these programs that are like one-time funded, or they have to keep going back to the legislature for funding and kind of we're asking partners, well, what do you think? And so I said, well, if you want our support, it'd be nice to look at Forest Legacy as maybe a model. And so their director, I guess previously was on the Forest Legacy work group like a while ago. And so was actually pretty familiar and kind of thought, I don't know why I didn't think of that before. And so anyways, just
Thank you.
to highlight, there may be opportunity in the future as they're thinking about how they get more funding or try to make more alignment with partners in some like the drinking water protection and some of these other pieces. So anyways, I think the Forest Service has done a really good job trying to assess or be more focused and be very clear on what does constitute kind of that risk to the land, and really trying to make sure that it is maintained in some level of management and there's an economic kind of component there for local communities. So anyways, there's a lot of good pieces there that I think could be replicated. So anyways, I'm encouraging more coordination and collaboration.
We're actually working really closely with them on our Columbia Gorge project, because they got funding from OWEB for that project as well. So Audrey from OWEB is in every meeting with that. And we've been working really closely on how our two programs can work together to make like one process when we have two different requirements and what they're looking for. So it's actually going really well. And I think it is going to open the doors for how we can work closely together in the future.
I want to mention that Kayla Swanson, who was on this committee for a long time, is the conservation funds, the Columbia Gorge project manager or something like that. So she's one of the people working on pulling together these pieces of funding. And so from the land trust perspective, like we consider OWEB like one of our best funders statewide for interests that land trust can hold. Land trust can't hold forest legacy interests, so they generally just help facilitate because it's within their mission, but they can't hold it. So like for a land trust, often you'll see something like an OWEB funding combined with like NRCS or federal funding. And the mandate for OWEB projects is specifically, you know, watershed enhancement, and it's more focused on habitat enhancement. And so like they look at stuff like the Oregon Conservation Strategy and things like that to make sure they're ecologically important lands. And then forest legacy, I would say, is more focused on keeping, you know, working forests and just avoiding parcelization. I mean, again, you guys are the experts, but when we're putting things together, like from a land trust perspective, think, okay, if we're doing something where it's conservation easement or fee title held by a land trust, we go to OWEB and then often have a combination of OWEB and federal match funds that work together. And then forest legacy, say land trusts usually are facilitating it and they can't hold the eventual interest, but it's more like focused on forest goals, including, you know, local economies and things like that.
That's all.
And I think because that Columbia Gorge is the drinking water protection program, right? That we'll have to match for. And then also our at the Maduro Ridge project down in Ashland, that's another OWEB funding source that they're using for caution. So we've got our fingers crossed that everything's gonna go smooth forward with both of those.
When did you say your videos are gonna be ready?
There's no exact date, but they're currently working on them, so I'm
Maybe by the end of the year?
I'm just realistic. Trying to make the information general enough, you know, details change, but general enough that it'll last long term. I don't think keep recreating.
All right, well, thank you so much.
Thank you,
Great
guys.
update and really interesting to hear about changes in the program since we last heard from the program. So thank you. It is, let's see. Not break time. We are next having the Forest Stewardship Program.
I'll just share it direct from here.
Sure, okay. Thank you, Chair Gerlach, and
Thank
the
you.
committee for allowing us to be here today. I think the agenda was organized well enough that you're gonna hear a lot of the same information from our Forest Legacy Program partners. My name's Cassara Nichols, and I am the Incentives Field Coordinator with the Small Forest and Owner Office Incentives and Assistance Program. And I'm here with Katie Lawbelt today.
Sure. My name is Katie Blauvelt. I'm title is Family Forest Land Coordinator on the same team as Cassara, Christina, and Chris. And basically our team manages, there's about 9 different grant programs, state and federal, that we all kind of coordinate and manage. Forest stewardship is one of them.
Yeah, forest stewardship is what we're here to talk to you about today. And hopefully give you a detailed look at what the program is and share information to hopefully better engage the CFF committee. Historically, CFF members have been involved with providing input for both the Forest Legacy Program, which you just heard about, and the Forest Stewardship Program through the Forest Legacy and Forest Stewardship Program Working Group, which thankfully you gave a good explanation for. So if you weren't aware, you're aware now that in the last couple of years with staff turnover, the new SFO office development and new management, there's much interaction with the Forest Stewardship Program and the working group. So what we're hoping to accomplish here today is to educate CFF members about the current Forest Stewardship Program and begin thinking about how we can best utilize CFF either through the working group or through the broader CFF body, like Mike mentioned earlier, as a resource for program advice, recommendations, feedback, or anything else really.
So I'm just going to provide a little bit of background on how the Forest Stewardship Program works and how we interact with the Forest Service. So the intent, it's a program administered by the U.S. Forest Service, and the intent of the program is to facilitate long-term stewardship of private forest landscapes by empowering landowners to actively manage their forests. And this is typically done by providing technical assistance to non-industrial private forest landowners and incentivizing the development of management plans for their property. To accomplish this, the Forest Service gives a grant to each state's forestry agency, and they do this on an annual basis. So it's a non-competitive grant. Each state just receives this grant each year. And so each state receives a grant, and they're supposed to do activities that align with those objectives, with the original intent. And the way they allocate funding to each state is using a national allocation formula, and that's this wheel on this slide. So the national allocation formula includes a base funding amount that's provided to each state, which is $100,000. And then there's the non-base funding on top of that. That's calculated using the metrics that are shown up there, and I'll just sort of high level walk through that. The non-base funding portion, 40% of it, which is the two green sections of the wheel, is calculated using data from the National Woodland Owner Survey. And it's potential acres, which is the number of acres of non-industrial private forest land over 10 acres. So any property over 10 acres that qualifies as non-industrial private forest land. And then the number of non-industrial private forest land owners who own more than 10 acres. So those two metrics make up 40% of that wheel. And then the other 60% are made up of performance-based measures. So that includes acres in the federal investment area, which is sort of the priority area. Some Legacy has a priority area. Forest Stewardship Program also has a priority area that are covered under a current management plan. That makes up 10% of that wheel. There's also acres in the non-federal investment area covered by a management plan. That's another 10%. There's implemented plan acres. So the difference, you could have a current plan or an implemented plan. And an implemented plan is where the landowner's actively doing active management because of their management plan. So that makes up another 10%. Sorry, no, actually that's 30%. They're in the priority area and they're implementing their plan. And then another 5% is for same implemented plans, but in the non-priority area. And then the last bit is the number of landowners assisted and number of landowners educated. So all of that to say, there's a portion that we don't have any control over. It's just the number of acres and number of landowners. And then the other portion is basically how much land is covered by a management plan and how much is being implemented, and the number of landowners being assisted or educated through this program. And that's all calculated on a 5-year rolling average. So let's say this year we were able to double our productivity and double the number of management plans. We wouldn't really see the effects of that as far as funding from this program for another 5 or so years down the road, because it's done on a rolling average. So like I said, we receive a grant each year from the Forest Service through this program. And so that means at any given time, we're managing concurrently about 5 or 6 different Forest Stewardship Program grants. Some years we actually get 2 per year because there was Bill and IRA funding for a few years. So we're kind of concurrently managing all of these different grants that have different expiration dates, different reporting requirements. And then we also have to do quarterly and annual reporting on all the things that we're accomplishing with each grant. And some of that reporting feeds into that national allocation formula, which dictates how much we get in the future. So funding trends for this program, overall, the national pot of funding for forest stewardship in general has been declining. We did see a significant influx of funding from Bill and IRA between 2023 to 2025. So we had a pretty significant increase, but now we're kind of back down to, similar to the legacy trend, we're back down to the pre-Bill and IRA trends.
So here you can kind of read the goal of what the Forest Stewardship Program is set up for. And to kind of bring it back to Oregon, the bulk of this grant supports ODF staff directly by funding just about any non-Forest Practices Act technical assistance work. You can see here that the grant will fund both technical assistance and financial assistance. So technical assistance can be when foresters talk to landowners, organizations, or the public to educate about forestry topics, or which can be really general, or assist them in taking advantage of the opportunities that ODF has to offer. So not necessarily specific to the forest stewardship program, but anytime a forester talks to a landowner and about forestry in general, it can qualify as technical assistance. The Forest Stewardship Program also allows ODF to financially assist non-industrial private forest landowners for up to 90% of the cost of a forest stewardship management plan for their property. Technical assistance for this grant is recorded by our field staff as they work with and guide both the landowner and the natural resources professional who writes the plan for them, which then gets reported as a measurable grant deliverable to the Forest Service. So like I said, it can offer both technical and financial assistance, both through the agency and directly to landowners.
And this pie chart is basically showing those three main buckets that we use to implement the Forest Stewardship Program. And this one's representing the grants we received in years 2020 through 2025. So the biggest blue portion of the pie chart is that technical assistance that Sarah was just talking about. ODF, majority is ODF foresters providing technical assistance to non-industrial private forest landowners. Some of it also covers staff going to training events like tree schools and giving presentations or other educational events like that. But the majority is ODF foresters providing technical assistance. And then the orange bucket is the financial assistance that Sarah just talked about, going directly to landowners to fund the development of their forest stewardship management plans. And then the green portion of the pie chart there is contractual payments to partner organizations that are implementing projects that support objectives that align with the Forest Stewardship Program. So this is just in general the proportions of how we've been implementing the Forest Stewardship Program to date, or at least in the last 5 years.
So we touched on this a little earlier, bringing this all back around the CFF's Forest Legacy and Forest Stewardship Working Group. As you can read here, the Cooperative Forestry Assistance Act of 1978, ODF is required to form a state coordinating committee, which was formed through CFF and has been in place since late 2020. That's where our charter is from. ODF's also required to meet at least once annually with the Forest Stewardship Coordinating Committee. And as mentioned earlier, this is kind of a gap that we're hoping to remedy. And just to put it into perspective, it's understandable why CFF was selected as the hosting organization for this stewardship coordinating committee, because the organization is comprised of a group of engaged and well-informed members. The organization's also well-established, and most of you, all of you, if not all of you, actively participate in a variety of forestry environments, which we value that knowledge base and want to explore how we can better utilize this group as we continue to administer the Forest Stewardship Program in the future.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
So if that group you were talking about, the charter was just up for us, that group, what percentage of the time do they spend on Forest Legacy and what percentage on the stewardship work?
Well, Katie and I have not engaged with the group yet. So Legacy has, and as far as we know, it's been kind of focused on the Forest Legacy program.
Yeah, as long as I've been part of Forest Legacy, which is just over 2 years, we've only talked about Forest Legacy stuff. I don't think we've ever mentioned Forest Stewardship.
Yeah, it's still, the group is functioning to support the forest stewardship program on the ODF level, right? Because aren't you required by the federal program to have that state committee? And I'm assuming that they're active in doing something.
Right, that's
Yeah.
that's exactly it. So we need to get the engagement back running again and getting the group's feedback, whether it is the CFF or the working,
Okay.
however we decide the best format for that.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I guess we're asking you what you think, whether we should keep this a work group, because it does have quite a few other members, federal partners.
We're not expecting a decision
Yeah.
today.
Yeah.
We're just introducing what's going on and we'll
So,
probably follow up.
so I'm just make sure I understand this. So right now, this seems like a logical conduit, through the CFF, but we've been meeting over Zoom, right, with kind of combined tree farm, OSWA, we just to talk about, what's going on. And so, but we're also members of those groups as well. And so this seems to me to be the most reasonable approach, right? That
That's what we're trying to figure out.
Yeah, exactly.
but it makes sense from a consistency standpoint if we're also taking charge of helping to prevent this forest legacy program.
Yeah, in the past, they've been coupled together. They don't need to be coupled together. They just have to meet that requirement that we're meeting at least annually, and we could do it more than annually too. We could meet quarterly, twice a year. It's really up to the group, I guess, how engaged.
I think this is great because, to get a better idea of all these different programs, like what you're doing, you're creating this mechanism to help understand all that. And that we would be, because you'd have the cross fertilization of ideas of all these different programs. You've got different folks with different experiences and you've got the landowners here. It makes sense that this would be the place to do this.
I keep having it swirling in my head that we have this working group, and Julie can chime in and correct anything that I'm missing, but we've been working on this unified management planning tool and wanting to make sure that things are simpler for landowners. And it's like, this should be something that's also, a piece in there, because we're trying to make it so that if a landowner goes and starts putting information into this management planning tool, they can do whatever they need for whatever level of management plan they need for whatever organization, whoever needs it. So, because some federal requirements are different than state requirements, or different from tree farm certification requirements, but that none of that data would be lost, because so many small woodland owners who stop at a certain point because it's just too complex. And if you're not brilliant like Dave, who can manage all these projects, or you don't have infrastructure, or you're new, or whatever, or things have changed, it's really hard, if you're inexperienced in it, to be able to pull all those pieces together, and having to do it for 10 different organizations makes people just stop. And that's a lot of assistance and a lot of education that just doesn't happen that could. So, and I'm trying to figure out, you guys should be a part of these seems like you should be parts of these conversations too. And Julie has her hand up and she can correct all of the things I've said that were wrong. Julie?
Oh, she's muted.
Sorry, Julie, you're muted.
Thanks. I would say Katie and Cassara are a very important part of the Partnership for Forestry Education, as has this program. A lot of the programs, Kate, you mentioned, and other historical ones, like the website and other things that the partnership does, a lot of those educational and technical programs that are funded to the different partners come through this program. So the Partnership for Forestry Education are a lot of the providers that are doing this outreach in partnership with ODF. They're not we haven't necessarily served as the working group, like the head as far as ODF advisory, but we work closely for the funding. We often help think about what is it that we need funded in the state, just like the projects you mentioned, but a lot of the funding has work through the partnership and to those different partners to help make sure that education goes to the landowners, and that we're working together to meet, like, for example, a lot of times OFRI may have some funding, additional funding comes from this program, other things that we can combine. So Cassara and Katie have worked very closely with the partners.
That project, the digital unified management plan, phase 1B of it was funded through Forest Stewardship Program. And then phase 2 assuming the grant goes through with the Forest Service, will actually be funded through a prep grant, which is another one that our team manages. It's another one that provides technical assistance for leaders. So we are engaged in that, and that's right. Julie, thank you for mentioning that. 'Cause we are having a lot of those conversations about best uses of forest stewardship program with Partnership for Forestry Education and other partners. I guess we don't have an official group that's dedicated to it, so I think we're trying to move in that direction to more appropriately satisfy that requirement. I don't know. And this is our last slide, and this is just showing a quick example of a property that I believe this is in Clackamas County, right, Casara? Someone who we funded a forest stewardship management plan for in 2025. There's a pre and post photo showing before he did work on a unit and after the work was because of the forest stewardship management plan. And the goals in the management plan was wildfire mitigation, where they wanted to clear brush and trees less than 6 inches in diameter, et cetera, et cetera. So this is the type of work that forest stewardship program funds.
Great.
Any questions for us on?
I want to make sure you heard what they said here. So we have declining funds. We have several different things need to use those funds. So in future, we may come to this committee and ask you, okay, we've only got this much money. We're going to put it here. What do you think? Put it in these buckets. That'd be part of the ask.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you, Mike. That's exactly it. In the last few years, we had a lot of funding and we were able to do even additional projects beyond just the core, which is technical assistance and management plans. We were able to fund like that phase 1B, other projects, but moving forward, as funding goes down, we're going to have to be pretty thoughtful about what is the highest priority that will provide the best benefit and align with the program so that we can feed into that national allocation formula and continue to get funding into the future. So it's kind of a balancing act.
So is the reduction in fund largely because it's a federal program and it's contracting? So are you saying that it's contracted now and it will keep contracting, you expect?
We don't know. Whenever I attend national meetings on this program, at least the last year, that's kind of been the general news is that they expect it to, hopefully it won't go down too much further. I know the base funding is 100,000 for each state, or it's supposed to be. I'm not sure if that's true anymore. It might be something less now. And so the pot of funding that they allocate at the national level just keeps reducing, and then that national allocation determines how much of that pot. But if we can maximize our portion of the formula all we want, but if that national pot keeps getting smaller, then our portion will get smaller as well.
I think part of it too is, yeah, we can put it all toward technical assistance, spend it all that. And then somebody will ask, well, what'd you do? And we're like, well, we did kind of this stuff, but if we did technical assistance, we show we work with partners like O3 or OSU, and we have these partnerships going. I think that'd be a better story to tell nationally, because then they can see that we're actually engaging partners, just the money ourselves.
Yeah.
Tell better something.
All right, well, I think that's a wrap up, unless we have any other questions. Seeing none, thank you so much. It's really great having that the SFO office exists and having you following all these issues and helping us. Thank you. 10:30 to 10:45 is break time. So we end a break. We'll be back in 15 minutes.
I should. Because I'm on the committee that's been meeting that's for the unified master plan. Like, we have a meeting on Monday.
Should be. It's there, Chris.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Sorry, boss. Calling CFF back to order after our break. Again, and next we have the Forest Conservation Tax Credit Program update. Hand it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Gerlach. Good morning, everyone. I'm Angela Malcolm-Stucker. I work in the small forest landowner office. Also, I am on the other side of the office from the presenters you've heard from this morning. The small forest landowner support and forest health unit. I worked on the state-funded programs that were created by the Private Forest Accord. And as the SFO implementation coordinator, I work a little bit in all of those programs. I'm filling in for Abigail Spagel this morning, who is our permanent forest conservation tax credit coordinator. I'll get into a little bit of the history of what's going on with some of that here in just a minute. But I've worked closely with Abigail in developing the documents and the workflows and everything involved in standing up the program. And I have been a key point of contact for that program through some transition we've had going on over the past year, momentarily. But first, I want to give a quick overview of the tax credit program, what it is, a little bit about how it works quickly. For those who may not be familiar or need a refresher. I don't have a formal presentation this morning. So bear with me as I try to cover a whole lot of material really quickly so that we have lots of time for questions and discussion. So the Forest Conservation Tax Credit, as you know, was created as a result of the Private Forest Accord and enacted in Senate Bills 1501 and 1502 in 2022. And it provides a financial incentive to landowners who choose to harvest following the standard practice rather than harvesting closer to streams following the small forest landowner minimum option. And that retained area is called the forest conservation area. And the tax credit is equal to the amount of the value of those trees that were conserved in that conservation area, plus the related costs involved in appraising and filing a deed restriction for limiting the harvest in the conservation area. And that has to be retained for 50 years. And it can be the tax credit is a little bit unusual compared to most tax credits in the state in that it never expires. And it doesn't have to be used in consecutive years. You can choose to use a little bit of your credit this year. You can wait 10 years and use a little bit of it later. It's a highly flexible and very long-term tax credit program. So that's a super high level explanation. We can get into any of the details if there's anything that you're interested in. But I'm going to talk a little bit about some history, some of our outreach and education plans. But before we get into that, does anyone want to talk about any aspect of how the program works or the technical aspects of it?
Everyone's heard about it, correct?
Right.
Okay.
I think I would just say there's something that I always find a little confusing. It's something like the channel option, which is like, you know what I'm talking about? That,
Yeah, the
like,
dry stream channel area.
everyone is confused by that. I would just mention that there's an add-on there or something like that that maybe you could touch on at some point.
Yes, it's that's a little confusing for me too, to be honest. Our stream specialist, Thomas Whittington, can explain it better than I can. But basically, if there's a dry stream channel that is doesn't have flowing water year round, that is part of your harvest area, you can get 50% of the value of trees retained around that added on to the regular RMA forest conservation area 100%.
Next.
Question for you. How informed are your on-the-ground stewardship foresters about this?
Well, I'm going to get into that. So I'm going to talk about that here in just a moment. And if I don't answer your question adequately, remind me and we'll talk about it some more. So a bit of recent history from our team. is our FCTC coordinator, Abigail. She's been on a job rotation outside the agency for the past year, and she just returned to us last week. So she's, catching up on things, what's been going on in the division and, a year's worth of emails and things of that nature. So she'll be able to talk to you about the topic in the future. So when she left a year ago, we had to post the position and do all the recruitment steps, and that took quite a few weeks. And we got someone in, and I worked with her to learn about the division, about private forest court, about the rules and the details of the tax credit program. And just as she was getting up to speed and ready to start doing some outreach, she left the agency. And so we had to start that process over. And we brought in Cameron O'Neill for what would then become a 6-month rotation. And during his time with us, Cameron focused on outreach to an extent. He attended some events and talked to some landowners. But he especially focused on talking to our field staff and gauging their knowledge level of the program, getting feedback about what they had seen and heard in the field about why the tax credit program is not particularly popular at this point, what some possible misconceptions were, some reasons that people might be hesitant to do it. And so he brought that feedback to us, and we're still digesting it, but I'm going to share with you some points from it here momentarily. He also created a draft of a communications plan. It's because he didn't have a lot of time with us. It's in its earliest stages. So Abigail and I are working in the coming weeks to flesh that out and get a solid communications plan to increase some awareness and correct some misconceptions about this program. So some of the feedback that we got, and this is not in any particular order, but there's a perception that the process is too complicated, that it's time consuming, and that because the foresters and the landowners are generally not tax professionals, that they're concerned that there may be tax implications they don't understand and that it can end up not benefiting them as much as they would expect. We heard a lot that the financial incentive is too low, that it would need to be 2 to 3 times the stumpage value of the forest conservation area for it to be worth their while to go through the process, take all those steps, which are not as extensive as it might seem, but there is a fair bit. There is an application for certification for the tax credit that involves providing quite a few details about the forest conservation area, the age of the trees, and various other things that aren't super quick and easy to gather. We also heard people are hesitant to commit to the 50-year deed restriction. And related to that, there's a misconception that it's the forest conservation area where the trees are retained is a permanent easement, whereas it's actually, it can be revoked at any time by the landowner. They would have to pay back any tax credit that they have used plus interest, but that can be done at any point if they change their minds or if they sell to a new landowner who doesn't want to retain those trees. There are a couple of issues specific to Eastern Oregon that we've heard about. One is, as you'd expect, there are fewer riparian areas there and there's less potential for people to claim the tax credit. This is a new one that I hadn't heard yet, is that there's some concern about increased fuel load and fire danger from those unharvested, unthinned RMAs. And another issue is that type 4 harvests are not eligible for the tax credit. So that's all your commercial and pre-commercial thinning. And that's a high percentage of the harvests that take place in Eastern Oregon. Foresters did share with us that there's some interest specifically from landowners who are particularly interested in conservation and those with more difficult to harvest riparian areas, but they just might not be ready to harvest yet and therefore haven't gone through the process. A lot of those factors are in the legislation and the HCP and are things we don't have any control over. But it is clear to us in the SFO office that there is work we can do to increase the awareness of the existence of the Forest Conservation Tax Credit Program and to clear up some of those misconceptions, both internally and with our foresters, particularly those foresters who are newer to ODF, and especially with landowners. So some of the things that we're working on or will soon be implementing into our communications plan and working on in the near future are, we've increased our presence of our SFO office staff and SFO foresters at events such as tree schools. So if you'll be at Tree School Blackmas next weekend, maybe I'll see you there. We're working to get updates and other types of articles from our office out to members of our partner organizations, such as OSWA chapters, Oregon Tree Farm System, Partnership for Forestry Education, and others. And we're looking to do some direct mailings to SFOs through Gov Delivery and our mailing list that landowners have opted into. We are working on updates to our website to make information about the program more accessible, to simplify the language and make it a little more clear. We're looking at incorporating a social media component as well, and we'll have to work with public affairs to see what's possible on that. And we're also updating our one-pagers that were created in 2022 and 2023, similarly to simplify the language and make that more clear. We just started discussing a new round of forester training to be working with the training team on getting new foresters up to speed on some of the details of these programs, having some conversations with them and having some refresher for foresters who heard a lot about it when it launched and haven't heard a whole lot since then. And also the videos that Katie mentioned earlier, the tax credit program will be one of the ones covered in those videos that the training team is creating, and we will be promoting those as well. So as I mentioned, we just received this draft communications plan and this feedback from the foresters about a week and a half ago, and still have quite a bit of work to do on it. But that's where we are right now. That's what we know. But I'd be happy to answer any questions and talk about any issues you have, and I'd love to hear any ideas you have for specific messaging that you think would be good for reaching small landowners.
I did want to say thank you for being so consistent about making sure you send stuff for the quarterly bark, because that's at least 4 chapters. And I know Dave picks up on things for the bark to also then add into the Clackamas Farm Forestry Association newsletter as well. So that's at least, so thank you for that. That outreach has been appreciated and helpful.
That's a great opportunity for us and we really appreciate it. And I've been sharing those with others as well.
Originally I asked that you come and present because when I met Cameron at the Hopkins Field Day last year, when he came on and I was asking him about this program, and he said basically, I don't remember exactly, but to the extent that maybe 5% or less of those harvest folks from small forest land owners are opting for this credit, where they have the opportunity to do so. And so I was querying about, what, and you've answered that to the extent that you can at this point, why there is such a small, number of folks that are doing it. And I'm just wondering if there was a way to present some simple hypotheticals, that we could put like in a newsletter again in the future, if, a properly vetted hypothetical, like let somebody, take a standard harvest and in a riparian area, or, where you're taking that strip. And the problem is that a lot of those strips, depending on the size of your creek, can only be 10 feet wide, or whatever, it's like 10 to 30 feet or whatever the people live. And so you can see why there's probably not that many trees in there that would be harvestable, that you could get some more footage calculations off of. And so, but nonetheless, I mean, if there was a way to just pick some reasonable examples and maybe 2 or 3 examples, say, okay, if you fit this category, this category, this is what you could expect. And this is what it means to you. Because right now, like we were talking about earlier, this is kind of an obtuse thing, that but this is one more layer of complication. I got, all I want is money for my trees, And so, if there's a way we can give them, hey, this is a, more environmentally friendly alternative that may work for you. but do it in simple terms, like a hypothetical, might be something that I haven't seen yet.
Yes, that's a great idea, and I will share that with Abigail. I will see what we can do to make that happen.
And maybe get somebody like, I don't know, if Clint Bentz or somebody like that, maybe if you need some professional tax accounting to go to run the numbers, maybe it might be worthwhile doing that. Just to see how it pans out, because otherwise, yeah, I think people have a preconceived notion of what they want to do with their harvest. And, that's the way they're going to go, and their consulting forester is used to that, and maybe will help direct them along those lines. But if a private landowner like myself, because we're going to be harvesting in about 4 years. And so, just like you said, but we'll probably take advantage of this program just because that's our philosophy. But it would be nice to know for us, going in, hey, what's a possible outcome here for a creek of our size and with the size of trees that we currently have, and that sort of thing.
Knowing how much less you'd be paying in your harvest tax too, so you get the tax credit, but you'd also be paying a little bit less because you're harvesting less.
Yeah.
And you have less reforestation because you didn't cut that.
Right, so I mean, there are a lot of factors that could go into that hypothetical that if you don't put all those pieces together, and we are not living in a world that's making connections very well. So somebody making the connections for somebody in a hypothetical could potentially be helpful.
And in today's point too, is, these hypotheticals, you can say, okay, I'm gonna come in here, clear cut this, leave that 40-foot buffer, or whatever it is on the smaller streams. I was looking at it today. So 40, 30, 10, I think. Just say, okay, I'm gonna leave that tree, I'm gonna take the tax credit based on the value of those trees and that small buffer there, clear cut the rest. It takes 60 years to grow a clear cut or stand the trees again. So get trees replanted back into that buffer still in there. This ACP, this tax credit is for 50 years. So this is something Oswald, Oswald and all these other folks, this is for the next 50 years. So when that 50 years comes around, they're going to have to do something with that, with the ACP. They're going to have to, my opinion is that they're going to have to renegotiate that, I think, at the end of 50 years, because it's only for 50 years.
Sure.
So there's going to have to be something there. So that's what you get. I keep pointing you, Oswald, these other folks involved, and say, okay, let's renegotiate this again. Say, how about this? We're going to come back, or, well, it's not going to be me. My grandson's going to come in, my daughter is going to come in, cut this stand of trees. Those trees are now gone from 60 years old to, do math here, 120-year-old trees, 15-year-old trees. More values have been placed on, again, I want to take another tax credit on those trees. And that's the negotiation. I'll leave them, but I'll take another tax credit on that. They're cut down to that buffer. That's the hypotheticals I think that Dave's talking about. We can talk about. If I own land, I would do that. I would actually leave that buffer and then take that tax credit and roll it in again, because I don't have to reforest. I don't have to worry about that. I don't have to do anything with that. Leaving that stream buffer anyway, another 40 feet's not, I mean, maybe it'll kill you. Or it'll be a detriment to somebody who's trying to make money, but tax credit is the money on hand that you can immediately apply to the management of your land. My understanding too. So
we're
same thing.
we're in bed with this stuff deeply, right? But the average landowner, they harvest once, twice in their lifetime, so this is way off the radar screen. There's got to be a way to help promulgate these ideas so that people will think about it up front. I think that's the crux.
But to Gary's question, it's like, I don't think they know this. That's the best.
I haven't run into it. That's all I can say. And I think on the reality of the definition or using tax credits, you need to have a good exemplary position showing what they mean, because most people, well, what's a tax credit? Well, it has specific definitions to it where it's eligible or not eligible. Typically you think, well, it's, my general income. No, it's timber income. It's from a specific source, and there has to be a good pathway to understand that. Because a lot of short-term landowners that just bought into a piece of property don't even know what we're talking about. And then, the dynamics of small landowners is typically they might have 10 acres to 100 acres. And in many cases, if they've just bought it, probably it's been logged. And so there is no real timber value to them for 40 years, maybe. So this is insignificant to them. But maybe they bought it too from somebody that hadn't logged it. And so they're looking at logging it, depending on their knowledge, their information, how they put the process together. These are very complex methods, and a lot of new landowners aren't pinned into it unless they're working with a consultant, not only a forestry consultant, but a financial consultant to deal with the revenue stream and how it impacts their income system, taxes.
And if they're responding just to one of the postcards that go out all the time, certainly in Lane County and up through the Mackenzie, oh, hey, you have trees, we'll harvest your trees for you. I mean, some of those people, you don't know that you want to trust them, and you wonder if they just copied and pasted an Associated Oregon Loggers logo that they got off the internet and don't really want to trust them. But those come out pretty much quarterly, that they show up and somebody really wants to buy my trees and cut them.
There's been an element out there for years that capitalized on that and made profits on it.
But the training piece is, that's one piece we do need to get out there, because first cycling through SFO forest was crazy. It's amazing how they move on sometimes. So we do the training is kind of the hardest piece of it. It's not an excuse, it's just something we gotta keep remembering continuously. That's the part of you guys. Yeah.
Yes, and
Did you want to say something before?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'll just make one more comment about the training, and that is we want to focus on helping those foresters who work with SFOs feel confident enough in their knowledge of the tax credit program and our other programs that they can talk proactively about the tax credit program. What we're hearing a lot is that they'll answer questions if they're asked, if they know the answers, but they won't bring it up as an option because they don't feel like their knowledge is solid enough. So we're going to try to change that.
So just a few comments from the operator side. As you can imagine, we do often serve as the consultant for small landowners. Sometimes our members do have a relationship with a consultant as well, to manage some of this, significant complexity that has come with the PFA for small landowners. And from our perspective, I mean, I'm just making an assumption here, so I probably shouldn't do that, but for our folks, that less timber value, but significant increase of workload to manage and take advantage of the tax credit. And we can say all we want that it's money on hand, but it isn't until taxes come due. So there is no incentive for the operator to say, you should look at this credit, because the landowner doesn't have money in their pocket today to pay for the extra services being provided to do all the deed stuff, to do the additional appraisal for that strip of land and those specific trees. So and I'm even thinking about like the consultant, right? I mean, you have a set consultant fee, but if you add on that additional work, it's additional cost too, to the landowner. So unless there's some opportunity to support those upfront costs for that additional work for either the consultant or the operator to do for the landowner, there's still a timing piece that is, I think, a bit of a challenge to make sense of. So, and I'm not a small landowner, so I don't know what your guys' perspective would be on that, but just to play devil's advocate a little bit, I think that could also be playing into that decision-making of if you've got an operator out there, they can do it. That's one extra step. They're going to make you pay more to take care of that. You're not getting more trees, you're getting less trees and less value. You can see how the way somebody may think about that would lead them to say, let's do the minimum option instead. So just to say.
Can I mention something? It seems like then the operator, if the operator weren't acting as a consultant, the operator would not have an incentive to bring this option forward because they wouldn't make as much money because there'd be fewer trees logged, right?
Yeah.
So if they're also acting as a consultant, as you say they are, then they could have additional income from, being the consultant on this project, right? So to a certain extent, the financial interest of the logger, they have a financial interest, which is a good thing in terms of motivating them to bring forward this kind of project if they're acting as a consultant.
I would say it's the opposite is what I'm saying, is that there's less under the tax credit, you have less trees getting cut, so less revenue from the project, but more work for the consultant or for the operator to do that additional appraisal or separate parsed out appraisal for those trees on top of all of the things that you have to do with the county, with the deed and everything else that's required to take advantage of the credit. So, and that's work that you have less money available for because you're cutting less trees. And so that has to be squared in a way, and it does eventually, you could argue, get squared when taxes come due and the landowner gets a credit. Now, a landowner may still have to pay taxes, so in a way, it doesn't feel like you have more money to pay for those services. But, and that's kind of that long-term perspective that a landowner has to have, because you may end up having to have more upfront costs to take advantage of that credit, because there's more work for the consultant or the operator who you're working with. Does that make sense?
That's consistent with what I was thinking, and that's how I heard you the first time. But as far as I was just thinking of it as more of a cash flow timing issue, which you mentioned it is, because to me, it seems like long-term, but you will get in the money for the credit will be a dollar for dollar reduction of your taxes. So it's equal to cash. It's just that you're saying the costs are upfront and that comes in later.
Yeah, so as far as why people may or may not be making the decision to go with it, that could be playing in. And I don't know that to be true, but it is reasonable to think that it may be.
Yeah, it's interesting to me, though, that if loggers are working as consultants on these projects, to me, that's like sort of good news, because they have a financial interest in saying, look, here are some options for you. And the loggers have, in fact, an incentive to bring that forward because they're getting the consulting income.
Yeah, potential.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it, I mean, it may not be as much as the value of the timber or the additional work hours.
Right, yeah.
Or your staff.
One thing that I've noticed in recent time, and keeps addressing this too, is basically there's small contractors out there that have become affiliated or work with forestry consultants that are submitting, information to landowners on, you can log your timber and we can do this for you, and we can put the plan in place for you, and we can take care of all that work. But the structure is very flaky when it comes to who pays what and when. The landowner's bottom line responsible. You're not gonna get around it.
Yeah.
And what you look at is, if we go back when you pay on the purchase or the sale of the timber off of your property, I can talk back when we used to look at 25 to 30% of revenue coming back, going to the logger to pay for the cost of his work involved in it. Today, it's 50% plus and can be more than that when you talk about the complexities of plans, and permits, and trying to meet these other objectives. And so that's one of the challenges that many landowners shake their head at and then don't have a full understanding of.
So Amanda is right in that there is an upfront cost potentially if they choose to hire someone, the landowner chooses to hire someone to do the appraisal. The landowner would get that appraisal cost back in their tax credit, but again, not until they file their taxes. The deed restriction, we provide all the documentation necessary for that, and it's just a fill in the blank template sort of situation. And that is a negligible cost of in the $100 to $200 range. So it's a minimal consideration, but the appraisal cost is a potential barrier being upfront.
Because they gotta cruise that timber.
Yes, you
The
do.
value of it.
Separate.
Yeah, separately, but,
And the other thing is a credit is not a direct cash refund. That's a number against the tax responsibility the landowner has. And it may discount what he pays, and it may be significant or it may be insignificant. But the reality of it, and this was early on discussion when we got talking about all these credits, it's not a money stream for you.
Right.
So there was a lot of debate and question about why we even want to use credits.
And I think, and we can get to you too, Teresa, but I think, and AOL is a member of the committee on this, what is the one that Julie does? Partnership Education. like my mind is blank right now. And if a lot of that is because we do act as service providers, in many cases as well. And so, and I'm saying this kind of to play devil's advocate a little bit, we do want to help inform our members who are acting in those capacities to better understand the tax credit piece too. So if they are working with a landowner who wants to do that, they can provide that service, with the knowledge required to do it the right way, right? And so we want to do that, and I would encourage ODF to work with AOL directly as a service provider and an education and communication stream, because we do have monthly kind of magazines that go out and bi-monthly newsletters as well. So if there's opportunities there for us to get information out, or to help provide feedback loops, kind of from that service provider perspective. Same with like the consulting for, the Association of Consulting Foresters, and like SAF and others, to help those folks understand what their incentive may be, or how to try to understand what your consulting fee may be to provide that service. Those could be really valuable things to communicate with all of those audiences, around how this works as well. So just want to highlight that too. I'm not trying to be totally Debbie Downer on everything, but just want to provide that as an option as well for you guys.
Thank you for that. I didn't mention earlier that one of the things we're looking at in our plans for this year is working more directly with AOL and operators. We haven't had operators as high of a priority as perhaps they should be. So you'll probably be hearing from Abigail in the next few weeks.
Okay, great.
If I were younger, the 50-year invitation would be really daunting. Just, it sounds great until repay plus interest. And if I suddenly need to do that harvest because of a liquidity issue, repaying that tax plus interest, that's a big deal. Which brought me to the other thought, which is I think it might be really helpful for you guys to be really clear on what the program is and what it isn't, and what you can help landowners with and what's just a harsh reality. There's still a lot of feelings around the PFA, even though, it's our rule of the land, we have to live with it, but there's still a lot of feelings. And sometimes you're going to run into that rather than the technical questions you can assist. And this is sort of just encouragement to be really clear that, yeah, there are differences, and I'm sorry that there's all this upfront work. Here are some things you can do, but yeah, you can't just, say I'm not going to pay this part of my harvest tax. You have to fill out the form. It's okay to do that. It's not necessarily your job to change people's feelings. It's effective.
It's okay.
Can I contribute to about the education of it? And just a reminder that in the Forest Practices, the illustrated manual, there was a team that worked really hard in the riparian chapter to put together visuals and graphics to help landowners understand that. And we've even put together presentations with some different experts of that. So I'd also encourage, if you are talking about it, and especially for like the logging community, there's some really good information in the illustrated manual to help smallholder owners with that decision. So we have some tools that quite a few experts spent time trying to help lay that out. So just as a reminder to that. And Heather, I was gonna put that chapter in the chat, but it says I don't have access to the chat, so I'm not sure what that's about. And then just one more plug while we have Forest Health in the room. I appreciate that the Forest Health Division at ODF, and Glenn's not here, so I can't plug OSU as well, but we have the Forest Health Conference is next Wednesday down at OSU on the 18th. So if you want some a good workshop before the tree school. The Forest Health Conference is a really great, bringing all of those folks who do a lot of good research at ODF and other places together to kind of do a state of the state. And if I get access to the chat, I'll put the link for that registration. So thanks.
You can go in person or virtually, so. And the agenda would give you an idea of all the things you wanted to make sure you didn't miss.
It could be Zoomed.
Yeah, so you can sign up, yeah, we signed up for it virtually, so.
I apologize. I put my screen up, my share up there. Did you have another slide you wanted to show? Should I
No,
share? Okay.
no, I don't.
Okay, sorry. Any more questions?
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It's been really helpful in this conversation. We've had this item up for wanting to talk about for a while, and you really helped address exactly what we wanted to hear about. And I appreciate everyone's input on it. So thank you.
Thank you all for your time. And if you have any follow-up questions or want to discuss anything, you can email us. You can email me directly or Abigail, or just use the small Forestland owner office at odf.org.gov email address.
Actually, one last stupid question, because when Gary mentioned it, I suddenly realized, so what were the limitations for what you could, I know you can't use the tax credit to pay your harvest taxes, but what part of personal income tax? It's just your personal?
It's personal or corporate income tax
Okay.
or state tax.
The state, like,
But estate tax is going to be less of an issue
you're
for
dead.
small forest landowners
Yeah.
because of
Okay.
the legislation that passed last year. So it's
Okay.
primarily corporate or personal income taxes.
But there's not a limitation on that part. It's like just you're at,
That's correct.
so that could, for some people, still be a good incentive. That piece could be an incentive.
and the estate tax for us old people.
That don't have family to have that land too, yeah. Although that is a perfect segue to land trusts.
Deductions, tax deductions, credits are better than deductions.
State taxes,
Yeah, okay.
the estate tax, but
Yeah, credits are better than deductions. That is true. All right, thank you so much. Right, well, I asked if I could give a little presentation on land trusts, and thanks so much for saying yes at our last meeting, because it is something I've worked on a lot over time. I am a lawyer, but I've worked for the last 10 years a fair amount and working up with land trusts and with landowners on various conservation projects. And so I know I was on the board of Coalition of Oregon Land Trusts, and I was also the chair of Columbia Land Trust for about 5 years, been on the board for a while. So this is a topic that's sort of near and dear to my heart. And it's also been kind of the overlap with what this committee does. It's been of interest for me. So the basic definition of land trusts they put up there, that they're nonprofits. They collaborate with landowners a great deal and with larger partnerships, as we discussed in the Forest Legacy part. We often collaborate and don't end up owning land, but just are active in the community and provide the kind of information that everyone's talking about, trying to bring resources together, have sort of a point from which information can be disseminated. And land trusts are one of those. I put some pictures in here. That's me wearing a hat, which I don't usually wear as a lawyer. And then the project that on the left, it just worked for a client. This was an industrial landowner, and a conservation easement ended up being developed with this client that helped with the revenue stream of this landowner. It was a conservation easement that expanded riparian buffers and expanded the rotation harvest. And from the landowner's point of view, it was just a revenue stream thing where they would have had to wait a longer time to get the revenues in. They did this project, and so they got some interim revenue stream on some land. In particular, it involved some sort of sensitive lowland areas, and also some land that had been damaged by a big windstorm. So that's why it made sense to them, and that's why they ended up being eventually a land trust project. This map shows the way land trusts work. It shows the local land trusts. So you can just see they have territories covering a lot of the state. Obviously, some of these are not forested areas, so land trusts basically focus on ecologically important lands with conservation attributes. You can see that there's some overlap areas here. Like if you look at Columbia Land Trust, which is along the Columbia River at the north, it overlaps with a land trust that's just a trails building land trust. Columbia Land Trust does a fair amount of forest work. It's involved in that project, the Conservation Fund and Green Diamond Fund project that has forest legacy components to it. The timbered areas, like for instance, Mackenzie River Trust, I think if I move my cursor, you can see it, right? Yeah, down here. They have a lot of forestry expertise because they're in an area where there's lots of forest work being done. So they have expertise in restoration. North Coast Land Conservancy is up along this area. They're involved in the one of those forest legacy projects protecting a watershed. Similarly, down here, Wild Rivers Land Trust has done a lot of work, particularly on the Eel River, but there are forested areas adjacent to that river where they've done projects. And there are also statewide land trusts. So I think we've say the Nature Conservancy. It does quite a few projects specific. Well, they have a project down on Sprague River, which is down this part of the state. I don't think my cursor really shows, but down in the Oregon Desert Land Trust area, they do work down there that has to do with their ponderosa pine forests in which they're managing them and reducing fuel loads. So they're doing a prescribed fire down there. So those are some of the like statewide land trusts that, in addition to these regional land trusts shown here, there are additional ones like Wetlands Conservancy I named. It's doing a project along with Weyerhaeuser Land along Hood River. So that's sort of the areas that they work in. Interrupt me if you have questions as we go. Being a lawyer, I put in some kind of information dense slides here. This is not the worst. There's an even worse one.
And you're sharing these with us, right?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
So they're nonprofits. They're set up to hold interest in lands. They hold conservation easements. Sometimes they hold fee title. That tends to be more appropriate for very high conservation value property. Because if they want to do a lot of restoration or focusing on specific habitat features, it makes sense to just own it instead of have a really complicated conservation easement. They help put projects together. They work with many partners across the state. They don't own all the land that they preserve. They really are collaborators. Like in forest legacy projects, as I mentioned, they can't own the land. They work with local governmental jurisdictions. The numbers, but I was just looked up on the website, about 800,000 acres have been protected statewide, and quite a lot of those 100,000 acres are open to the public, which is a number that's somewhat comparable to the amount of state parks lands. The typical mission is voluntary land conservation. We work with landowners who wish to preserve their land. That's really the niche of land trusts. They're looking for partners who want to work with them because they care about their land and have similar values and goals. They're active in rural areas, as this map shows. And they have a lot of expertise. In this talk, I just wanted to focus a bit on land trust. One reason I've enjoyed being involved in the land trust community is because I'm a little bit of a, I like working with details, I like get project done. That's what they do. So they like work with funders, agencies, local governments, forestry professionals, appraisers, surveyors, title companies, and tribes. Like, that's an area of expertise, just knowing like what appraisers to call. Oh, there's a shortage of appraisers. Let's see if we can improve that pipeline, things like that. And on their staff, the larger land trusts, of course, have more staff, but they often have, biologists and mappers and forest management people. Smaller land trusts naturally contract out some of this stuff. So we'll hire, say, something like Trout Mountain Forestry or something like that to work on their land. But they really are practical organizations that house within them a lot of capabilities that overlap with the capabilities that landowners either are seeking or have themselves. Project managers, I mentioned that just because that's something, if you're sort of figuring out how to do something, a land trust will often have like an outline of just the steps of doing certain kinds of projects, or a Gantt chart or a spreadsheet that just says, okay, if you're going to getting an OWEB grant and a federal grant, and you're going through the process of, an appraiser or a survey, they just like can keep track of those steps, and they don't advise landowners on those things, but they collaborate with them and provide some background structure. So we've talked quite a bit about projects already, and these are some ones I thought of mentioning just in terms of talking about how do projects start up? What kind of projects do you see? So I put forth like a coastal forest project, which is a fairly, pretty small one, to be honest, for a land trust, because it's hard to get economies of scale on very small acreages. This is a 450 acre donation. That's pretty easy because you don't have to get funding for it. So it was simply donated to a land trust. It has a management plan. It's a mainly post-industrial plantation in which they're doing thinning and trying to get back to more natural habitat with a lot of invasive control. Again, everyone, the commonality between any forest landowner. Another one is just, again, a donation of a conservation easement. Again, pretty simple. It's about 1,000 acres. This is property that was had been clear cut by an industrial forest landowner. The landowner bought it and then wanted to do some harvest. They were doing pretty significant harvesting, mainly kind of releasing future growth in a congested stand. It's a conservation easement, so that involves a management plan, and then the land trust comes in once a year, works with the landowner to make sure that for instance, significant invasives controls happening, things like that. And also usually there are riparian buffers that have certain requirements. The next example I pulled up was just Mount Hood area forest. This is an interesting one. It's a small forest landowner that is sort of putting together puzzle pieces and owned an initial piece and that was interested in acquiring some adjoining land to protect a watershed, and the land trust helped this landowner put that project forward and help get some funding for that. So the landowner's ownership footprint expanded, and the expansion was basically funded by grant dollars that they worked with the land trust to get, and then the land trust holds an easement on it. The project where I put the Columbia River SDS Forestland, SDS was a forestland company, industrial, well, small forest land owner, just a timber company that ended up selling its lands. It shut down. It was a family business. And that's the project that Carol Swanson's been working on for the Conservation Fund. It's a big acreage for this kind of project. And it was basically bought by the Conservation Fund and Green Diamond Resource Company. And this is a big project where the initial sort of being able to participate in the auction when this timber company was selling all this was something put together by all these partners who want to be competitive bidders. They got it. And the plan is then over time to identify the high conservation value lands. And a lot of it will still be held by Green Diamond and its affiliate, but in some cases subject to conservation easements. This is a forest legacy component to this project. And then some very high value watershed land for the Dalles is being protected. And then a chunk of it is going to be owned by Columbia Land Trust, and they've done private fundraising to get the money in for that. So I think I've covered the main points here. This is a big project, a multi-phase project. And this is kind of thing that the Land Trust, again, has experience in doing this kind of thing and with working with landowners. Yeah, we already talked a lot about forest legacy. I put other kinds of projects. I just wanted to emphasize that sometimes, the land trust doesn't own the land and is simply helping a community come together and do a project that matters to people locally, like, keeping forest land as forest land or putting trails together. I mentioned here the Wallowa Lake East Moraine project, which is a forest legacy project. The fee title ownership is now in Wallowa County, and it's a community forest. The trails projects, there are a couple of those going on, like one is along the Hood River, there's one along Columbia River. And an interesting one is the Corvallis to Sea Trail, which is, I think, is a project maybe less known, but it goes from Corvallis all the way to the coast and covers a bunch of landowners, like I think Starker, Weyerhaeuser, OSU. It's really, I think, a cool example of quite disparate community members and interests coming together and putting this trail together.
My son heard about that. He's very excited.
Yeah.
The trail. I don't know if it's in.
Is it done? Ready?
What's that?
Is it ready to hike then?
It's just a trail. It's a trail put together of, like, you can Google Corvallis to Sea Trail, and it's a trail you can follow that has permissions from a whole bunch of landowners to go all the way through. And occasionally, there are little glitches occasionally, but basically it is currently open and goes to the sea. And there are permissions granted by these various landowners. And I mentioned land trusts were not the pivotal parts. This is really more of a local community group. I mean, there's like this some task force. That's a key thing. But I mentioned the concept of land trust because land trust, like Greenbelt Land Trust, was helped people put this project together. Pacific Forest Trust owns some of the land that the trail goes over. So again, a land trust typical project, and there are lots of partners, and it's very attuned to like what the local community wants, and it has some great partners in terms of, you know, large scale forest owners helping have public access to the coast. So land trusts are appreciative of the opportunity to work with landowners. Like that's a gift from the landowner to take in, to do things a little more complicated way that can definitely, you know, for the landowner goals. But land trusts are appreciative because they know that often it takes a little longer to put the project together. There'll probably be other buyers or other partners, and in order to do something, because often it involves putting funding together, and that involves a sort of multi-step program. But I just want to say thank you for those landowners who get involved in land trusts. Land trusts know a lot about working with families, especially when I'm working as a lawyer on these projects. You know, you just see like typical family dynamics. It's just got to make sure everyone's on board. It can take a while. Sometimes families say, oh, this is the time we want to set up a limited liability company to hold this and formally have a voting arrangement. So land trusts will work with families, and that's when the family needs a little more time. And land trusts naturally value relationships with neighbors. So both when you know, if a deal's going to be going forward, they want to meet the neighbors before it happens. And cooperating in stewardship is very important because usually the land trust has, under a conservation easement, for instance, an obligation to come and just walk the property. And I had mentioned before, they're used to working with funders. I think we've mentioned that enough. And land trusts, like, again, they work a lot with these issues you all work with, like water issues, revenue streams, tax assessments, even carbon and offsets, the repository of knowledge. And they also are pretty good at dealing with title companies, which can be a sort of specific dance and putting transactions together. So I just mentioned that because I, as a lawyer, wasn't involved in that dance, but you know, sometimes the title company can be a little rigid, and it can be helpful to work with a land trust in terms of thinking, you know, there's this power line that was never built, or the road isn't where it says it was supposed to be on some document. So working through those practical things is a specialty of theirs. Because I'm a lawyer, I put very red at the very bottom. Land trusts do not advise on these issues. They just cooperate because obviously land trusts are not going to be legal advisors or financial advisors, any other kinds of advisors. But in working out these kinds of issues, it's useful having a partner that knows what they're doing. So no representations made, and I'm just giving this in my personal capacity. I'm not speaking for any land trust or for the Coalition of Oregon Land Trust or anything. I just wanted to talk to you about it first. So let's see, doing a project with land trust, I walk through sort of typical way this works out. First of all, land trust and landowner connect, beginning of everything. So hopefully they're aware of one another. Sometimes the land trust will be focusing on a watershed or something like that, proactively reach out. Sometimes it will be the landowner who, especially if talking with your neighbors can be good because then you can, it's hard working with very small projects, but if a land trust has identified a watershed or a key habitat area, or if a landowner has neighbors who want to work on something, you can piece smaller pieces together to end up a bigger project, which is better for everybody. And then you decide on what mechanic is going to work. Conservation easement might work, or fee title acquisition. It depends largely on the landowner want. So for a conservation easement, as I mentioned, you can just donate it. That's pretty easy. The motivation for the landowner is to have the land preserved. Conservation easement, it can be sometimes a little hard to find a land trust who will hold a conservation easement because of course it's a lot of work on the land trust part. It's their charitable mission, but it can be a fair amount of work. So you might have to, you know, check it with a couple land trusts. There's a tax donation if you deduct it, you know, subject to having income to deduct against and all that. But again, that's one of the motivations people have, as I mentioned in some of the projects earlier. And one of them that was a principle, but a landowner had a spike of income in 1 year. They thought this is a good year to do a conservation easement donation. So purchased by the land trust, occasional land trust will have money, but that would be typically a smaller acquisition. For larger ones, they walk through that process I was talking about where they do the funding. Initial steps for conservation easement. You look at the title, you get rid of any problematic encumbrances. Probably all property owners know this drill. You know, you walk through what potential problems on the lands, how to fix them. You work together the probable timeline, set a closing date. And then after the recording of the easement, then the land trust is monitoring. I'm going to stop here because I've been talking really fast. And anyone want to ask a question or? Okay.
I have lots of questions.
Sure.
But I guess one key question, so kind of a two-parter. So land trusts are 501c3s, or
Yep,
what type of
yep,
tax
yep,
structure do they have? Okay, so the 501c3s, and then their money, like how they are funded, is coming from either like some type of a overhead, like indirect that they get from grants that they acquire for the landowner or through these different programs, or do they have set fees, like per acre fees or other types of fees to provide these services? Like how does the cash flow work?
Well,
the trust side?
land trusts are 501c3, so they're nonprofit organizations under this, it's usually nonprofit corporation under, say, Oregon law. And then under their federal tax status, that is, say, they're nonprofit organization with a public mission. They do private fundraising, so they get donations just of money from the public and from private foundations typically. So that's their like core unrestricted money. They sometimes get in restricted grants.
Yeah.
But most their unrestricted money is usually how they're funding just having staff and
Yeah.
pursuing, getting out and talking to people and coming up with projects. Then when they have those projects, they have some donated easements. Usually they try and get funds in for the stewardship. So they need money into the future for doing the work with that. So they often try and get additional donations, say, even if it's a donated conservation easement. Then for these more complicated deals where they're having to come up with funding, say a fee title acquisition, where they need to come up with money to pay the landowner, they will do like I said, like look for OWEB funding or looking for some other maybe watershed, soil and water conservation district funding. And so they tend to have a pool of unrestricted money that comes from donations and private foundations. They take that money and they use all their staff then are funded to go out and receive donations, do stewardship, and then also put together more complicated projects. So they have to come up with grant funding essentially. Does that work for you?
Yeah, that's helpful. Yeah, I wasn't sure how much or what that kind of the private funding and just like the general like fundraising kind of aspect of the trusts were. So that's helpful to know that that's similar to many other nonprofits. That is their base kind of how they fund employees and how they build out their staffing capacity.
Yeah, sort of the messaging of that from land trust perspectives. They really do leverage private donations because they use that core money that's given to them to build up their staff to do these projects where they can pull in various funding money, kind of, end up with an impact that's more than just their unrestricted core funds.
Yeah, because other organizations, like they have worked with other organizations that have pretty high indirect or overhead that they take from grants to help pay for staff. And so it sounds like maybe trusts don't have to do as much of that because they often have a better core base of kind of this private foundation and other fundraising that they're able to do. I don't know if that is the case or not.
Land trusts are sort of distinctive among nonprofits in that they have, like their balance sheet is interesting looking because they have all this land usually, right? But it's like, as you know, kind of a professional money pit, this big thing of land you have to take care of. So they tend to have pretty big balance sheets, but in terms of their unrestricted available funds, that's this core money that's usually from donations.
Yeah, and then I didn't know for land that they own, then when they are doing projects on those and they are selling timber, then that would be another revenue.
Yeah, yes, they can have income from timber, from some fees. Sometimes if they do a big transaction, say for an agency or whatever owner, they will take a percentage fee just for being the the go-between.
Yeah.
Because they do have to make sure that they have the money to apply to taking care of the land
Yeah.
going forward. They
Yeah.
usually have a stewardship fund of which percentage allocations are specifically reserved for particular properties. Just trying to be responsible about being a forest landowner and realizing you need to be like taking care of your property, not just
Yeah.
owning it. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Those are my questions. Super sexy topic of, balance sheets and revenue streams. So it's like I've never gotten the opportunity to ask this question.
Yeah.
So,
Go ahead.
so so a landowner, if they're interested in donating a conservation easement of whatever
Yeah.
portion of what then is the landowner's remaining relationship with that land? Do they like have to vacate that land because it now belongs to, I don't understand how that process works.
Well, it depends what they do.
Okay.
If the landowner has ends up with a conservation easement on their land that's held by a land trust, and they end up using the land as is provided in the conservation easement. Usually they just simply continue to own it, to live on it, to do the things that they're interested in doing on it. Like the way a conservation easement is set up, the fee title is retained in the landowner. And then the conservation easement will say like what conservation values are protected. That's what this last line at the bottom is. There can be different conservation values, but a lot of them are set up in the state statute on conservation easements. But the interests are retained by the landowner, except to the extent that the conservation easement modifies those. So a conservation easement will often like take out, say, subdividing and development rights. They might have some affirmative obligations like fencing streams, say, something like that. So it's a combination of often removing development and subdivision rights, and then they work out sort of management goals with the landowner going forward. But there's often like a exclusive, like if there's a residence, they'll like put a box around that sort of territory wise, right? They have sort of an envelope they call building envelope that's basically cut out of, say, the management for ecological and forestry purposes. You'll have a box around your house. You say, this area is where we live and we're going to be doing whatever we want to be doing on that. It's not affected by the other terms of the easement. Sound?
And then that goes with the property when the landowners die.
It's a recorded interest in real property conservation easement. So yes, it's perpetual and sticks to the property. Not all conservation easements are perpetual, but these kinds of conservation easements almost always are, unless like there's something, I don't know, like eminent domain proceeding or something. The title purchase, again, this is kind of lawyerly stuff, but it just walks through the various steps for buying property, which is like another property transaction, but usually with some additional steps like that you'll recognize, like doing an appraisal, a purchase price. Then the funding plan is often typical for this. That's not like a typical private sector real estate deal, to pull in funding to allow the land trust to buy it. They do title review, purchase and sale agreement with all the typical provisions in that, from representations of the property and condition and things like that. And then a closing agreement, and then these move through the steps of that to actually selling the property. The land trust will usually go on the property and check out the condition just like any other buyer. And then title passes to the land trust at the closing. The land trust just owns it. They manage it consistent with their mission. It is a nonprofit that has a mission of conservation, so it must manage the property consistent with that and with other management goals of the land trust. So land trust goals, I wanted to put this here, partly just show some overlap between the typical goals of landowners and land trusts. Land trusts are usually working to conserve, if you are a working forest land trust, you are working to conserve conservation benefits on working forest lands and preserving habitat where you're also harvesting and getting timber revenue. As I mentioned, not all land trusts do working forest conservation easements, but that's one way of working together. Land trusts, like other landowners, is dealing with all the same practical issues. Like Amanda was pointing out, they have their own sort of revenue stream issues. When they put the deals together, the timing can switch, so they can use bridge loans. Often they can get nonprofit lenders to give them low interest rate projects. And for a typical project with a land trust. The goals are the same as the landowner. They want to move to the end, and land trusts often can use a variability of funding sources to make that happen. And I put at the bottom what I think land trust forest conservation usually focuses on. So very often they want to do bigger projects. Again, this can be pulling together smaller pieces, but they have more impact if they have larger, landscape kinds of conservation. They focus on high ecological value lands. They often look at like the Oregon Conservation Strategy or the Nature Conservancy map of habitat and high value lands. They're looking for habitat connectivity. So think about ways that their ownerships can like link to other ownerships, including just the, typical industrial forest land or stuff like that. There's still forest land, so animals can pass through it from pools of high value habitat to other pools of high value habitat. And they also work on community support. They usually pay property taxes, even though they aren't necessarily legally required to, partly because they want to make sure they contribute to the local economies. So this is a little bit reiteration again of what I mentioned in the prior slide. Common goals include avoiding conversion of working lands to other uses. They recognize the need to keep tax bases strong, so they tend to pay property taxes. Some of their ways of looking at things are similar to local municipalities because they often work to not have dispersal of residences deep into forested areas because that for municipalities may be really hard to provide basic services in those areas. And they work on avoiding fire risk. Watershed work has become even more and more important. Some of the projects we talked about before, like the Dalles watershed, Arctic Cape watershed, there are a number of watersheds that land trusts have been involved in helping rural communities keep non-sedimented good water. And then land trusts are often partners in allowing traditional community uses, for instance, working with landowners to allow hunting and fishing and forest and other lands. Again, this would be voluntary actions, but they do tend to try and keep those uses. Okay, a little slide here saying we are friends, fellow landowners. We'd like to work with you. We have the same goals: management of our land, restoration of our land, and having a reasonable revenue stream to get work done. These are all pictures of various projects that I've been involved in. Prescribed fire and fuels thinning shown. One of them is, sort of dog hairish looking forest up at the upper right, where you can see the logs being harvested just to really release some growth in the remaining trees and get that back to a more productive, as well as habitat beneficial forest. The picture down below with that orange equipment, someone in the room knows the name of that, but I don't. Pulling out trees. This was a project where there was funding to try and get it back to more of a sort of, late seral kind of forest for habitat purposes, but did involve doing removal of trees in a way that provided some timber income to the land trust. That's it. I did run through that kind of quickly, for which I apologize. But if anyone has any questions just outside of the topics I've mentioned or building on that, happy to talk. And also, don't be a stranger. I will not be. You have my email, so you can be in touch if you have questions about land trust things. I'm stepping off this committee, and one thing I'm picking up is going to be working with another lawyer to work for the Coalition of Oregon Land Trust, just volunteering, but working on their pro bono legal project. We'll be helping land trusts across the state work with various legal issues, and again, helping them on transactional things like it's describing, working with landowners to work through the issues to have successful projects move forward, including funding issues if those come up. So
I have a question.
Yeah,
So the executive order that we're getting involved with the governor.
Yeah.
You mentioned carbon markets and getting
Yeah.
back into those kind of things. What's your opinion on carbon markets, I guess, or how hard is it to get into those, or how hard is it to manage those? Because we have a reforestation trust. Yeah,
First resource.
resource trust program that did deal with carbon markets. So just wondering what's the, is there, trying to figure out what this carbon market thing is that they're, I think government wants to get involved in. And who should be the best person to be holding on to that market, I guess.
Well, that's sort of a big question. I guess I'll say, like, I'm not sure, you probably know something about it, but like, you know how there are like two kinds of markets. There's like regulatory market, like the California ARB market. It's somewhat restricted now how many non-California participations you can have in that. Then there's voluntary markets, which are a number of different issuers and registries, nationally and also internationally. And those are ones, like I would say, like if you're looking at real additionality and long-term 100-year carbon offsets, that's if you look at, say, California registry, that's kind of gold standard. There are many, many voluntary projects which have very varying requirements and to a certain extent additionality in terms of changing behavior connected with the issuance of the credit. I think if someone is looking, like I know a land trust, for instance, that has done a carbon offset project on certain lands that they were not planning to, that they aren't harvesting them because they're holding them for habitat value. So they've gotten some revenues in that allows them to do more conservation work. This is a situation where they consider the money they get from their carbon project restricted in their own accounting. So they want to make sure it's back into additional conservation. I think that, like, in terms of carbon, like say the Elliott State Forest, I think they're developing a carbon offset registration project for that. There are all sorts of different registries, and the registries where you go and say, what are the criteria for participating in this program? And then you enter your inventories, and then you have that inventory verified, and you work through the point where you basically have the credit issued at the end of that rather complicated process. And that's when you get paid the money, because then you can sell it into the market. Like in a regulatory market, there are covered entities that have to buy these. In the voluntary market, it's more like corporations that wish to reduce their carbon footprint buy in these voluntary credits, or anyone can really buy them. But the registry is sort of how to describe, it's kind of like, imagine like in the securities market, like a public offering. The registry helps you put together a product, which is an offset, a voluntary offset, and then those get sold and the revenues go to the landowner. So in terms of thinking, where do you start when you're wanting to do that? I mean, that's like they're project developers. So you might like check out, oh, what are different project developers? And again, like they aren't jumping to, I think there's like one called Blue Source or something like that. They changed their names frequently and I can't name any, but it's one of those things that most people go to a developer and they say, this is what my land looks like. This is what my management plans are. And there's usually discussion of the currently sequestered carbon, which includes the trees as well as soil carbon. Then you get, as I said, some kind of inventory. There are lots of projects that are currently working to link typical forest inventory, for timber purposes, making it easier to take existing inventory information for forest management, making it easier to link that to carbon inventory. So you don't have to double the work. And I think EcoTrust, that project they're working on, is meant to bridge that gap somewhat. You can go onto EcoTrust's site and they have a tool for looking at your timber inventory and linking into what that means carbon wise. Usually, again, you get a bump up in terms of trees that are not useful, like say, I'm trying to think, like I know in California, like a trash tree, tan oak, has a fairly high sequestration value, timber value, so you can end up with things like that that help bump up your carbon inventory versus timber. Those are just little dump of the things I know that sort of relate to your question. I think that like the natural resources people, the governor's natural resources office are like people who are thinking about these issues and ways to, look at the various state lands and think about how to do offset project.
Yeah, I was just wondering if it's a good idea for the state to get involved in carbon markets, state neutral. Stay out of it.
Julie has a comment. She probably can add some succinct input on this issue. Julie?
Oh, I'm just going to education. I'm not going to get into that conversation, but I would say, Mike, there's a really good workshop that SAF puts through Forest Ed that Michigan State puts out, but they're just released one for Pacific Northwest. And if someone, whoever's leading this at ODF, it'd be a really educational course. They brought in speakers like Edie Sony Hall and a lot of the carbon experts from all over the Northwest to go through the different programs, help landowners and even professionals help understand the different markets and where they can help with that. So I can send that link, but there's some really good educational programs that summarizes and kind of helps bring all that. And SAF has offered it, and they just started, I think Amanda might know, but I think it was like March 3rd that this last one for Pacific Northwest was started, but it's all recorded online so you can do it at your own pace.
I'm deadline to registered for that course.
Sorry,
Deadline was yesterday.
Katie's in it, Julie, so we're good.
Perfect.
Yeah, I'd say that there's sort of been, it's hard for a small landowner to do a carbon offset project. I think that is true. But there's work on trying to change that. And of course, the acronym for the entity that's doing most of this, I can't remember, but like there's an entity that works on the East Coast that's trying to expand its program to the West Coast to help consolidate landowners, like have landowners get together and then do a project that covers their various properties.
So we're in a carbon project,
Mhm.
and we've been so for several years.
Mhm.
Works out great.
In February, the local Society of American Foresters chapter had a meeting in Lane County, had a meeting with Jim Merwin, who's someone who's working on making some of that more accessible to smaller landowners, some of the aggregating things. He could be an interesting person at some point to have come speak to this group as well. He had a really good presentation on trying to lower some of the barriers of entry for smaller landowners.
Well, it happens because it's going the other way, because when
Yeah.
we enter, you can get as low as 40 acres. And now they're back up to about 100 acres, unless the properties has such high sequestration value that it warrants the cost. Because last year, because of this, it's basically an international program. We had a forester from Spain had to come and audit our place with his group. So it's not cheap.
Well, and he's working on sort of a program so that it could be something that would be so there'd be lower barriers for participation, mostly because it would be aggregating different folks. So he's working on, it was one of the most interesting ones I'd gone to as a small landowner. So it's work in progress, but ultimately having him on our list of people that could come and present could be useful.
What you're balancing is what you have to pay the landowner to make the landowner interested in doing this versus the cost of, like I just mentioned, all of the paperwork, all of the field work, verify that, oh yeah, I got a lot of trees and they come out and they're all cut down. So I mean, there's the realities of the situation. That's why they're unfortunately seem to be moving back up to higher acreages, which is contrary to what you want to see, right? And so, yeah, it would be worth investigating further, but like for Oregon, I know the city of Astoria, for example, is in a regulatory carbon market program. And so they have been so for quite a few years. So that's a big public entity that's involved in something like that.
Yeah, and I guess I'd be curious where you're seeing that, Mike, because that's news to me. I haven't heard that information from the governor's office and I don't see it in the executive orders anywhere.
Just mentioned somewhere. It's a possibility. I don't know if they're doing it.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of political discussions during the legislative session around the transportation funding and moving away from maybe the climate protection program, which is our regulatory program in the state that doesn't include biogenic emissions and biogenic carbon. So it doesn't include the sequestration piece, and the Oregon Climate Action Commission, which is the commission that is advisory to the governor's office in this space, has not discussed this. So that's why I'm question mark to me.
It's just thrown out there and I heard it.
Yeah, and it's just complicated. So I mean, I'd be careful about kind of just throwing things like that out there because I don't know how much validity there is.
That's right. For private folks like us, we don't answer to anybody.
Yeah.
But for public folks, I mean, you've got all these other uses. And then all of a sudden, you're in a carbon program, you're restricted, generally to what you can harvest. So that might be contrary to some other uses.
Yeah. Yeah, I just haven't heard anything. And I don't know, Mike, if you've been hearing about it from like on state lands or
Oh, no.
Talking about private land.
It's just thrown out in my conversation, so I figured I'd ask.
Yeah.
I didn't, personally, I don't think the state should be into.
Yeah.
I
It
think
should be a heavy lift.
Yeah.
If you're aware of it, this was ongoing probably over 15 years ago when we had our first effort looking at the carbon markets and telling the carbon values of your trees and enticing industrial income into investing in it. And they did have an opening to it that pretty much all collapsed, and most of the small landowners that I'm aware of that were involved with it lost. They were gone. Money was drawn back and they basically had to decide to pull out or still ride along with no money.
Things have changed ever since that, but nonetheless, it's, you know, and just to give you an idea, for us, we would get paid about $40 to $50 an acre per year. So it's, you know, I mean, over the long term, it's not going to equate to a clear cut. If you wanted, you took 40 acres of property, you're going to clear cut it. The cash present value of that exceeds what you would get, at least at this point, in the carbon market. But if the value of carbon keeps going up, you know, like it should, then at some point those curves are gonna intersect.
Well, it was interesting in this presentation that Jim Irwin made here a couple of weeks ago at SAF there too. And he was referencing the income stream or the high value corporations. Microsofts and the big players out there that have the income stream that they have an interest, but understand they also pull back. There's something there that's not profiting them or benefiting them or giving them a special recognition. Hang on.
Yeah, let's see what happens. And there, if it collapses, then all the agreements are null and void. But in the meantime, we're not harvesting. We're getting a check every year, you know, to pay for. What we do is we take that money and we put it into our restoration work. So that's kind of our cycle, you know, and that pays for large wood, that pays for boulders, pays for sparring gravels. You know, people show us,
And you that check are happy, you're okay.
hey, everybody's happy.
Everybody's happy, yeah.
You can have an overlay like you can have a carbon project with a conservation easement as well on it, like I remember working on a project that had like a limitation on the amount of inventory you could take each year. So you could harvest, but you were subject to an inventory reduction cap. So there are a number of different ways of making it. In that case, they had the revenue stream of the harvest, which was limited by this conservation easement, plus the carbon offset income that was because of the cap. So there are a lot of different ways you could put it together financially.
I know a lot of the proposal talked about timeframes of holding 10 years, 20 years, 50 years. That you just commit your property to it, that you could get out of it, that you technically had to buy out.
Yeah, you do.
Yes,
You have
true.
to pay back.
You have to pay
Yeah.
back.
Yeah.
You received.
Now, what we're gonna do is, like I mentioned, we're gonna do a major thinning in 4 years, but we're gonna do it, we're gonna work with Chestnut Carbon, it used to be Forest Carbon Works. They've got these biometric models that can tell you, okay, how much can you harvest without incurring a penalty? Or if you decide to incur a penalty, is there an incremental nonlinear change in what you are going to be penalized for versus how much you can harvest? And so there's things like that that you can work with to, you know, hopefully achieve a reasonable agreement between, you know, between the carbon folks and yourself. So you can still make some money at these sporadic timeframes when you thin, but then also get your check every year, but then also not incur a penalty because you're taking too much off.
And I think in the resiliency sphere for us, and I mean, kind of what Julie mentioned, that Michigan State is where I did my forest carbon master's project. So, that, you know, they're kind of a premier place for this specific education and this specific research and work. And I think it's kind of what you're describing, Dave, is important, that, you know, carbon and active management are not mutually exclusive. And kind of like Wendy said, having an easement and then the working forest easement and carbon projects are not mutually exclusive. However, there are many markets, you know, volunteer markets and even regulatory markets that oversimplified, from my perspective, what is and is not, you know, appropriate accounting metrics for the benefits or the costs associated with with that. And so like improved forest management, for instance, under CARB there's a lot of research out there that shows it's actually not doing what it says it's doing from a carbon perspective, and actually could be significantly detracting from the ability to do more because of, the way that wildfire regimes have increased, and the decrease of work and availability of economics and jobs, and then that just it's a vicious spiral down versus what is intended to be a positive spiral up, right? So it's complicated, right, I guess.
I would just mention about fire, an interesting thing about fire is that, say, in the regulatory market and in a good voluntary market, you have a percentage of additional credits put in like an insurance pool. So it's what they call an involuntary reversal. That is to say, a reduction in that province that the landowner did not call their intent. Say like fire, that's compensated for by this insurance pool, basically.
It's like 10%.
Yeah,
for us.
and it's, in some of them, it varies depending on the fire susceptibility of the particular land, because I think like it goes from like 10 to 25% depending on the land and how likely it is to burn up. So there are different registries, like I was saying, but a good one will account for things like fire. Yeah.
I can't recall if we've had a discussion on this, but I think it would be worthwhile to have at least another one, because this whole thing changes.
It changes quickly. That is
Quickly,
very.
so it might be worthwhile to have, but geared more toward small forest land.
That's why I was suggesting Jim. He would be really a good presenter on this topic.
One of the premier guys actually in Oregon is David Ford. Right, I mean, he's the man. I mean, he's the one that sets up a lot of these things. But maybe have not just one person. I mean, have somebody like from Forest Carbon Works or whoever, just to give you a practical example of a company that represents small woodland owners, because that's who we all are. That's our mission, right? And so that way you could have a couple of speakers talking about it, so that people get a more informed sense of what's going on here. Because I personally, I hate to see this whole kind of philosophy evaporate, because I think it's not for everybody. For those like us, it's a good way to feel good and earn some money at the same time. But just needs to be known about it.
I think it's about lunchtime. My final comment on this topic, though, is that it is a source of jobs. Like these are, like, you have a degree in carbon, right? Don't you? And so like this kind of doing the verification and all that, there's a lot of on the land work required. There's a lot of jobs available in these registries and things like that. So it can be a way of, especially here in Oregon, we have really good resources for training people in these areas and finding jobs. With that comment, I think I'm going to break up for lunch. We can continue talking if we want, but
I'll put on goggles.
meeting starts again. Let's start again at 12 o'clock. Sorry, not 1 o'clock.